Welcome back. Do you remember Welcome Back, Cotter? Oh my God, that was okay. That's way even before my time. But do you remember Nick at Night?
Oh yeah.
Okay, and they'd have Bewitched Be Wednesdays and I Dream of Jeannie Thursdays. I don't know if Welcome Back, Cotter had an actual day, but it's the one that John Travolta got us started. Vinnie Barbarino, up your nose with a rubber hose.
I think the only reason that I know that is I think that was the sample that Mace used for his song.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. See, hey, we're crossing bridges here.
Different generations.
Well, welcome everybody to the show. Today is, I don't want to say it's going to get dark, but it might get a little angry.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just been a trend, but we've kind of stayed away from certain aspects of the United States just because everybody's a little on edge now. Everybody doesn't quite know what's going on. There's people that are pumped about what's going on. There's people that aren't pumped about what's going on.
More people not pumped about what's going on.
I think so too. But at the same time, I think that we have to go back and look at our history because as weird as it sounds, it makes me feel a little bit better about what's going on to know that we've had private shit shows going on for like the last century in this country.
And it's so weirdly cyclical that this just runs around in cycles. There are going to be portions of this, discussion are going to be able to, you could just clip those out and just be like, this applies to exactly what's going on. And without even missing a beat, you're going to be like, exactly.
Yeah.
And with J. Edgar Hoover and basically for a time, the American Gestapo, this is, everyone has kind of that knowledge that like J. Edgar Hoover might have been a little sleazy, but maybe they don't know exactly why. Like, was he just a bad person or anything like that? But after finding out and kind of getting down to the nitty gritty of what he actually allowed to, basically made happen, not allowed to happen. He was the orchestrator of it. Why the fuck is a building named after this guy?
Well, and so much of it too is you look at a man who spent 48 years as the director of the FBI. You have to think that if he kept keeping his job through, I think it was 10 presidents?
Might have been more than that. And not only did the only thing that took him out of the job was death.
The Grim Reaper.
And it did not come soon enough. He was late by a number of years.
No, but if you see somebody have a 48-year career, you have to assume that everybody probably liked him. And this is more of everybody feared him rather than liked him.
Yeah, he wasn't there by a lot of people's choice.
No, and it's tough. We talked about this is going to be the J. Edgar Hoover episode, but J. Edgar Hoover for the longest time just was the FBI. He made the FBI in his image. He was the director of the BOI when it became the FBI. Like it's too hard to try to separate the two of them because he was the forward-facing individual for an agency that got to do a lot of shit. And we've talked about the COINTELPRO episode. There's going to be some kind of overlap with that stuff, obviously, because they were running it. But also, there's so many other subversive things that he was doing in the FBI. And it's tough not to just say he, because he had the final say in damn near everything that happened in the Bureau.
He is the FBI up to a certain degree. And so nothing is done by the FBI without him knowing. Now, he will state in many circumstances that he was not aware of those actions and they were just a few bad actors, in different areas. But just based on how many different kind of like pies he ends up sticking his dick into, nothing happens without J. Edgar's approval.
No.
Without that famous blue ink being signed off on that page.
Yeah. So without further ado, please, wherever you're listening to us, if they have ratings, 5-star review would be excellent. Reviews, subscribe if you're not already. If you're a new listener, hello, I'm Adam. Chris is my co-host. We run this fun history pod together while being high and just enjoying everything about it. YouTube, still no video yet. I'm probably going to keep saying that for a while, but if you want to subscribe on there, it only helps us out too.
You got to vision board that shit and speak it into existence.
Exactly. So, we got to jump into the FBI and jump into J. Edgar.
Hey, We're not the only one, apparently.
No, not the only one.
All right, let's go back to wee baby Edgar.
All right, we're back in this weird time period again where we're talking about somebody who was born in
Got
1895.
that 18 in front. You're horny for having that 18 in front. There is something when we're talking about someone who has had such an impact on even kind of where we're living at these days. There is something weird about like, oh fuck, this person was alive in the previous, back 2 centuries, I guess.
19th century.
Yeah.
We're talking about the 19th century. John Edgar Hoover, born New Year's baby, born July 1st, 1895 in Washington, D.C. This is going to be a theme throughout his life. To a father named Dickerson, it'll be funny later when we talk about it, and Anna Maria. They were a political family. Dickerson wasn't a bureaucrat, but he worked in the government. His grandfather had worked in the government.
I guess maybe not political in the sense that what people are thinking, but they were government employed oriented. Like, yeah. They'd always worked within the field of like the government.
He was literally born on Capitol Hill.
Mm-hmm.
It was the neighborhood that was on Capitol Hill at that point in time. It's a church now, but that's how far this guy went in his life. He never left D.C. and he never really left like the general area that he was born.
I wish I could say the phrase like hometown boy done good, but no.
No, and I think that his career trajectory in the beginning was pretty good, but things veered pretty significantly. This, I feel, is weird, and we talked about this in the lead up. He didn't have a birth certificate that was on file until the 1938. He was 43 years old when he had a birth certificate.
Yeah.
All the other kids in the family had birth certificates. They were all known by the government.
I think they had been like standardized in the state in Maryland where he was since like 1875. So it wasn't like there was a loosey-goosey system. Like sometimes we file them, sometimes we don't. Every other one of his siblings had a birth certificate. For some reason, he did not have one that was certified up until 1938 in his 40s.
Yeah, what? He was 43. I don't see how that all works. Like, how do you he's the head of the FBI in 1938. 1937, he's running the bureau before it becomes the FBI without a birth certificate.
Yeah.
Like, we just let that go? He graduated college without a birth certificate.
Yeah, how did you get hired on initially without... That's where those family connections probably come in because they know, everybody else in the family.
Yeah.
High school, choir, ROTC, debate team. He got started early because he loved to argue against women's voting. He was against ending the death penalty. He thought we ought to stick with that. He did grow up with a stutter and basically developed kind of a fast cadence in order to hide it. And it earned him the nickname Speed because he just talked quickly to try to I feel like he was trying to outrun the stutter.
Yeah.
He's like, if I just bull rush through it quickly, then I'm not giving myself a chance. But it kind of gave him this weird speech cadence that would follow him throughout his entire career.
And there's plenty of audio listening to him speak. I think he was able to control it a little bit more as he got older. But to be nicknamed Speed because you talk fast is... I don't know. It's interesting to me. Like, is that something that he gave himself or that everybody else gave him?
It's something mother gave me.
It could have been. His family dynamics, father, everybody was still together in the picture. There's no divorce, but he definitely...
It's like the 1800s, dude. It's close. It's like 1900 around this time, but divorce wasn't a thing. Like, what is the woman gonna do?
No, yeah, that's divorce back then. Probably ended up with only one parent.
You had to be rich to be able to block a divorce.
He leaned more towards his mother's side. He loved her. She was a bit of a, this is how the world works. This is the general order of things. This is how things need to go. I think that kind of maybe imprinted a little bit towards his ultimate ambitions in life. At 18 years old, he became a messenger for orders in the Department in the Library of Congress. I mean, that's pretty cool. He gets to work in the Library of Congress. I don't think that befalls many 18-year-olds that don't have family that already work in the government. But
No, probably not. Somebody probably has cushier jobs. That seems like the kind of job, like you turn 18 and if your family's connected, you get to go be a page for somebody or something like that. If it's like, I mean, his family has worked in the government. What can we do? Just put him in entry orders over at the Library of Congress. This is where he learned what he's going to be known for as far as like the FBI index and his filings. He learned organization, record keeping, how to collate all this information. Because again, it's the Library of Congress. It's not just like returning books and shit like that. It's the record keeping for all of the documents that, are being generated and that we have.
And it wasn't like a Dewey Decimal System. This was like a governmental filing organization system.
And this is kind of where he first develops this system that he's going to end up using to create all of these profiles that he's going to have on these people.
A lot of profiles. He attended George Washington University. At that point in time, they referred to it as kind of like a night school for people that work within the government to continue their education at night, go work for the government during the day, go get your degrees at night. He graduated in 1916 with, hilariously, a bachelor's of laws.
Yeah.
What in the world is that? Is that a law degree?
Yeah.
And we just call it a law degree now instead of the Bachelor of Laws? Like you just know all of the laws on the book?
Okay, I'm going to get this insanely wrong. What I love here, we get to play armchair historian,
Absolutely.
armchair
The
psychologist in this, because you could deep dive into this guy's brain. And I said it before, this is a bag of cats. Trying to pin this guy down on who he's got beef with and why he's doing what the end result is. You drive yourself crazy. So with the Bachelor of Laws, that is like your law degree. And then nowadays you have to have your law degree, you have to pass the bar exam, do all that kind of stuff. So I think a Bachelor of Laws is the way I understood it, allowed you the ability to practice law. But then what he did is he went back, I believe, and he ended up earning his
LLM.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out where he wrote. Okay, yeah. So then that's the advanced degree.
Okay. It took another year because he graduated with that in 1917 from GW Law School.
So 21 years old is when he graduates the first time, 22 when he graduates the second time. During that time, he was a member of what's called the Kappa Alpha Order. I don't know exactly what the fraternity was called, but it was part of that family of fraternities. And this was a good old Southern frat. And this had been designed to protect the flowerhood of Southern knighthood, or the flower of Southern knighthood, or something like that.
Yeah, I had to take a picture of it because it was...
It's a club for the good old boys, I guess.
Yeah. The Alpha Nu chapter of the Kappa Alpha Order, a Southern fraternity that was born out of the desire to carry on the legacy of the incomparable flower of Southern knighthood.
I do declare.
That feels odd, but we're talking about a time, and I was shocked by this, but DC was completely segregated. Segregation was still a very, very big thing in the United States. They didn't end up desegregating the schools in DC and Maryland. I think it was like 1951 or 57. So we're talking about a time...
The fucking nation's capital.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
But we have fraternal chapters of Southern Brotherhood in DC.
Well, we're going to talk about some other Southern Brotherhoods here in a little bit. So he ends up, after he graduates with that advanced degree, he's quickly hired by the Justice Department. Now, much the same way it works today, no one really understands who covers what in the fucking government. But the Justice Department was essentially, the courts and everything, but it was also in regards to any of like the investigative departments that were looking into certain crimes, trying to establish, it was kind of a newfound thing as well, as far as trying to kind of establish these differing departments for the gathering of intelligence, kind of protecting the country from the inside.
Not to mention, we're shaft deep into the World War.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We're trying to get things figured out. He becomes a clerk July 27th, 1917. So same year he got his degree. He's a clerk for the War Emergency Division of the DOJ.
Which does make you exempt from the draft. So he's not going over there to fight. And this is at 22 years old. He's actually soon made the head of what's called the Alien Enemy Bureau, which sounds like something that could exist today.
It sounds like Independence Day.
That's also what it sounds like, too. I want to see Bill Pullman up there giving a passionate speech. He was authorized by good old Woodrow Wilson to basically arrest and imprison allegedly disloyal foreigners without a trial. So, again, fuck. Woodrow Wilson goes ahead and tells him, because again, we are in World War I. We're concerned essentially about any Germans living within America already, performing espionage, all that kind of stuff. And his job is to basically try to kind of out these people and get them out with kind of just a loose set of guidelines for how he's going to go about it and kind of who he's going to need to report to.
Yeah, this feels like something that maybe should have some thicker guardrails on it.
Yeah, he's 22. Your brain is still, I know it's a different time. Everyone's more mature back then because they're having to grow up faster, but still, you can be dumb as fuck at 22.
Not to mention, you're in charge of imprisoning disloyal foreigners without a trial. Like, where are you drawing your information to figure out who is disloyal and who is
What is your definition of disloyal? What is your definition of foreigner?
Yeah, there's just a whole lot to it. The 1917 Espionage Act would end up giving them the authority. They arrested 98 of this 1,400 quote unquote. There's so many quotes on this board just because you have to do it. Suspicious Germans living in the United States, and they designated another 1,172 as arrestable suspicious Germans. So just in case this first 98 batch goes well, we can go back and try to get 1,100 plus more.
Yeah.
It's so odd to me that his career trajectory after this, age 24, August 1919, he becomes the head of the Bureau of Investigation's new General Intelligence Division that's supposed to monitor and disrupt the work of domestic radicals after attempted bombings just scared the shit out of them.
Welcome to the radical division, dude.
Yeah. These anarchists, and we're talking about a time in the world where the Bolshevik Revolution happens, Tsarist Russia is overthrown, and you have Lenin basically leading this new Russia. And you have these anarchists who they believe are seeing this change going on, and they're concerned. Now, I'm not sure why they're too concerned, because if you think about the United States history, we kind of threw off our king oppressor and became our own people. But you were kind of alluding to it earlier. This was a completely different way. This was an uprising that happened where the proletariat took out the bourgeoisie. We have our own proletariat in this country, and maybe we don't want to hear a lot of the bourgeoisie being thrown over.
Yeah, and in a way, listen, it's an imperfect system. They're all fucking imperfect systems. We're trying something new. We're still trying to establish this whole democracy thing and get it on solid footing. It was 50 years ago, maybe 60 years ago, we had the Civil War and everything. We just got together. We're trying to figure this thing out, and there's going to be speed bumps, and it's going to be rough going through it a little bit. All of a sudden, this thing, communism, comes in, and if you start to already see this class divide within the United States, and that's something that is very familiar to you based on like the monarchy that we were previously in. Because again, there's a separation of class. It's much more distinct in a monarchy.
Yeah.
But you see this happening. You see the writing on the wall. And all of a sudden this talk about like, hey, maybe everybody should kind of have a seat at the table. There's this new way of doing things. You're going to be threatened by that.
Well, there is also going to be some legitimate influence coming over from Russia, because there's still a lot of people emigrating to the United States.
There's still money here.
And if they get over here and they see the conditions and they say, well, we just overthrew the people that kept us in these conditions over here. Maybe we don't overthrow them, but if we can shake them up by going on strike or threatening them a little bit, lightly.
You guys are where we were 6 months before this happened. Watch, it's going to get worse for you guys, and then it's going to be too late.
And then there's some people that took it to the extreme in this anarchist vision of trying to bomb political figures.
And I think what ends up happening here is this entire thing, Hoover's entire being centers around the Red Scare, communism, essentially anything radical and outside his comfort zone. And when it comes down to this, this first Red Scare that we're going to talk about, it's all about trying to essentially paint that in the worst possible light. And that's what he's going to kind of go whole hog for when it comes down to kind of the first big action that's going to take place, the Palmer raids.
We have workers' strikes going on in major cities around the country. There's a little bit of chaos, and when you see workers' strikes, for some reason they looked at that as a communist action, which obviously it's not. Clearly it's not. We still do it to this day. There's good old-fashioned capitalist Americans that are conducting strikes.
Yeah, but don't they hate unions?
Huh?
Isn't that the whole point, is like corporations and capitalists hate unions?
Well, yeah, because it's easier to bully around a bunch of ones than a group.
No, of course. So that's the whole point too, is they tried to instantly paint that, because again, that's the naughty word.
Yeah.
Communism ends up getting grouped into, and this is not a fucking pro-communist episode or anything. It's hard not to look at J. Edgar Hoover and who he's going after and being like, did it really need this, especially at this time, in the country? But you have this thing that, all of a sudden unions start to form, strikes start to happen. And in order for these companies to basically get public opinion on their side, all you got to do is be like, they're communists. All those people striking are communists. And all of a sudden public opinion looks and is like, they're fucking terrifying. Communism is the devil. And it basically turns public opinion and forces a lot of these like strikes and everything like that. Of course, you have the strike busters. We talked about that.
Yeah.
I can't remember what episode.
Pinkertons.
Yep.
We talked about it also in the Prohibition episode, I think.
Yeah. And so you have just essentially this buzzword that can label people but automatically put them at a disadvantage.
Yeah, it doesn't matter that the pictures in the newspaper show the factory workers that are on strike and everybody that's holding a sign only has 3 fingers on each hand.
Yeah.
It's that they're communists. The communists took those other 2 fingers, not the machines that they were forced to work on in unsafe conditions.
Yeah.
And so if you can paint everybody with those broad brushes, you can start to say, well, these people are striking. A man named Mitchell Palmer, who was the
He was the Attorney General.
Oh, the AG. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And before I went off topic, what I was trying to say is you get anarchists, radicals, and communists all kind of lumped in together and all talked about together to make everybody think that they're all the same thing. And so anarchists essentially just kind of want to tear the existing system down, and maybe they don't really have an idea of how to rebuild it back up. They don't have anything to put in its place. You have people that have more of like a radical agenda, and that could be anything that just someone finds a little bit distasteful to call that radical.
Yeah. Radical could be wanting to, call Wednesday hump day.
Or like a woman could vote.
All of that stuff seemed very, very radical back then. And when you start to kind of lump all these people together, when there's issues like an attempted bomb plot that happened outside of Mitchell Palmer's house, also happened in the exact same neighborhood that a full-body-legged FDR is living as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when these bomb plots go off, bomb plot for the Palmer, we'll talk about the Palmer raids, it'll be an episode. Hilariously enough, the guy that was going to drop the bomb off in front of Mitchell Palmer's house ended up stumbling up the stairs and fell on the bomb and detonated it. It blew Palmer's door off the front of his house. It blew out all of his windows. And when he walked out, there were just body parts laying around. He's like, what the shit? Is this a victim or was this the guy that did it?
Yeah.
It turns out that it was the anarchist that did it. He just had a little oopsie with his bomb.
I think they said that there were packages sent to people within the government, 18 different cities, something like that. There were only, I don't think anybody actually died. A security guy died in the one that blew up in front of Palmer's house.
Okay.
And then one of like somebody's housekeeper got their hands blown off.
So not good.
No,
not something that you want in a normal functioning society.
But this is something essentially it's an anarchist move. This isn't something that essentially a competing political party would do, because that's not how you continue to operate. Yeah, we're a small political party. We're going to bomb some stuff and not expect to be shut down. So this is just anarchy is what it is.
Well, and when we start talking about the Palmer raids, they basically consisted of there was an initial raid that kind of happens in the beginning. I don't think Hoover was the one that initiated it. I think Palmer was the one that initiated it. They go into the Communist Party union or whatever. They arrested a bunch of people. They were able to deport some of them, which we'll talk about why that gets a little hairy here soon, because the DOJ is in control of deporting people. It's somebody completely different. But the majority of the people that they round up in this first raid end up not being people that they can deport. They're citizens, they're naturalized, they're in this country legally.
It's someone that picked up a pamphlet from someone outside and is like, fuck it. I'll go to a meeting. And all of a sudden you somehow get spotted coming out of the meeting, because all of these are under surveillance and everything. So there was also a huge, because they took place over the course of, I think, a couple months. One was November 1919. The other was January 1920.
1920, I think, was a big one.
And I think that was the one that Hoover was put in charge of, because there wasn't, after the one in November, essentially, I think Palmer was also gunning for the presidency.
Yeah.
And so he was focused on that as well. And so that pulled his attention. After the first one, there was a little bit of blowback because it didn't have the effect that everyone wanted. It didn't get the big busts and the big numbers. It was kind of like, is this really a threat? Like, what are we doing? And so he convinced them to allow them to go through with the second part of the raid, but he kind of stepped back from it to focus on, I think, his presidential run, and put good old J. Edgar in charge.
So the second one, 6,000 people rounded up across 36 cities. There were 556 foreign citizens that ended up being deported, and the rest of them were beaten, held in just horrendous conditions for an indeterminate amount of time, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, without a trial. Now, again, this feels like a flashpoint right now in the country. These people weren't given due process. They were all rounded up. They were thrown in prison. 99% of the time, the warrants for their arrests were like literally not even filled out.
They looked like they had been whatever system of copying they did. They had like a blanket warrant, and it hadn't been filled out even, partially, or some of them like improperly. Basically, they had generated a ton of bogus warrants because the authorization for this raid, of course, they had to go before Congress and everything to get it approved, was much smaller in scope than what actually occurred. So they only issued a smaller amount of warrants. Yeah, that's not going to stop J. Edgar.
No, it never does.
So, so over the course of the two raids that they do, I think it was 10,000 people were arrested between the two. A large portion of them were without warrants, and they were also not telling suspects. Hoover determined kind of partway into the raid that people weren't naturally aware that you needed to have or you had the right to an attorney before even speaking or anything like that.
Yeah.
And he felt that too many people were, because they were being notified of it, they weren't then speaking after that because they then were aware it was a thing. A required thing that you're supposed to tell someone. And so Hoover was like, just stop telling them. We'll tell them after we kind of get them, booked and everything like that, and we get some information out of them.
Long time off from Miranda rights.
Yeah.
The Department of Labor sees this, steps in, and says, A, we're actually the ones that are in charge of deportation, so that's not really something under your purview that you should be doing. And we've gone through these warrants, and these warrants just aren't good. So they're slowly releasing people as they're going through and nullifying these warrants, because if you don't have a warrant to arrest somebody, you can't just go through and pick them up.
The Secretary of Labor at that time canceled 2,000 of the warrants. That's how dog shit a lot of these were. In total, I think 3,500 people were detained, and like you said, 556 ended up being deported. But as far as what was kind of like set as the expectation for what they were going to do, not only did this thing come up short with probably what they expected to happen and what they had kind of pitched to Congress to get this approved, all of a sudden now you have brought in a whole bunch of like American citizens that had like dipped their toe in, or maybe just as a passerby, like peeped in to see what was up with something, and fake warrants. you are essentially just like bogus charges. You're not reading people their rights.
Yeah.
And Congress is pissed.
As well they should be.
As well they should be.
So there kind of becomes this push and pull where there's a lot of hearings that Palmer's being pulled into. May Day, being a labor holiday, is always kind of a flashpoint. There had been a couple different actions that were happening on these May Days as they came around. And Palmer says, if we don't continue doing these raids and catching these people, the next May Day will be the worst May Day that we've ever seen. There will be anarchy in the streets. It will be absolutely awful. He's basically calling his shot, thinking that he knows exactly what's going on.
This is the cult leader that's like, this is when the ship's coming.
Yep, exactly.
This is when the mothership's coming down.
And May Day came around after Palmer made all of these lofty predictions, and there was zero
anarchy.
Violence.
What?
Yep.
Wait, what?
Nothing.
Oh, okay.
Not a soul died that day, they said. The newspapers were reporting about how safe it was to be outside.
The only explosions being seen are the fireworks lighting up the sky.
In this situation, I think Palmer finally overplayed his hand, because there's always the illusion of like this could be happening, but once you predict something so boldly and then it just goes awry, he could have tried to maybe pitch it as, well, these 556 people that we deported were the ones that were in charge of it.
All the agitators and masterminds.
But you can't play that card when you said that there were still people here that were going to do this. So I don't think that Palmer even got out of the Democratic National Convention. He wasn't even the chosen candidate. This completely tanked his candidacy. He took a hell of a lot of flack for this. But somehow, some way, J. Edgar Hoover kind of skirts this. And he does it because he's just a lying sack of shit. There were still strikes and race riots that were, of course, spurred on by these Palmer raids, because once these people got let out, they were pretty pissed off.
Yeah.
There were like 30 cities. There were a couple other bombings that had occurred. One of them happened on Wall Street, but they couldn't really pin it on an anarchist kind of thing. I think they ended up scrapping it up to it was some sort of a malfunction of something on the street that blew up.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, how easy is it to build a bomb? back at this time, it seems pretty easy. Secondly, because we developed smaller concentrated explosives in the future, back then it was like, they're not small.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to figure out, because they said it was a horse-drawn carriage or cart. The guy parked it, tied up the horse. Oh, the poor fucking horse.
Yeah, he didn't deserve it.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Maybe it was a commie horse.
Glue everywhere. It was a commie horse. He deserved it. And then walked away, and then this thing blows up. What is being pulled? Like, they chalked it up to it being an accident when all is said and done. What the fuck is being transported by horse and buggy in the city that has the chance of just being like, oh yes, by the way, this can accidentally explode?
A pharmacy load of gasoline or whatever they had back then.
Here comes the nitroglycerin cart. Yeah.
Hoover's part in the Palmer raids, he ends up not necessarily running afoul, but he ends up arresting Marcus Garvey, Cyril Briggs, and the future Supreme Court Judge Felix. He definitely is a part of the famous family of Frankfurters. He came in
to the Frankfurter Empire.
Exactly. He had some hot dog money at some point.
That just makes me think of Tim Curry's character, Frankfurter from Rocky Horror.
But it's incredible that he was rounding up these big names and just tossing them in. And of course, when they get out, their activism is going to go up tenfold, because all of the things that they're preaching against just happened. They were just a witness to their own kind of presumptions of what could happen.
We're still in the Red Scare, though. I mean, we're pretty deep in this first Red Scare, and so all of this is done under the auspice that it's protecting the country from communism. And because that is such a fearful thing for even like the president and everything, they're just like, yeah, I mean, I guess. Yeah, whatever you got to do. Communism can't get a foot in here.
Yeah. Knock for the Masons, score -1 for the Masons. Hoover actually becomes a Mason. He joins the Scottish Reich. He ends up achieving that mysterious 33rd degree, being the Inspector General in an honorary form. This might lend to the fact that like everybody was just a Mason back then. It feels like if you were in political power, you probably had some sort of Masonic.
Is it like the samples of Tide? Like they provided it with samples of Tide?
Everybody got a business card back then, which again, we did a whole episode on the Masons. Seemed like cool people.
We did mention, I think when we were going through the list of like famous Masons, we did mention Hoover, and we did mention that was a knock. But overall, not against the Masons.
Everybody else seems okay.
Everybody makes mistakes.
That's true. Again, this career trajectory just blows me away. J. Edgar ends up becoming the deputy head in 1921 before being appointed the acting director by the AG in 1924. So he is just making his way just slowly up the ladder. But 1924, the guy's 28 years old.
Yeah, I think he was 29. And again, at this point, it's still the BOI. It's still the Bureau of Investigation. It hasn't been named that more snappy title that you can now put with like female body inspector, as the t-shirts say.
But as acting director, if you're gunning for that director job, there's still these other people that are kind of in government and in the weeds.
And that aren't fucking 29 years old.
Yeah. There's this guy named Wild Bill Donovan that we're going to talk about a little bit later that's also kind of jockeying for this position to be the director of this idea or this BOI. May 10th, 1924, Herbert Hoover, who's made a lot of terrible decisions in his life.
Well, hang on. What was the first thing that J. Edgar did when he got made the acting director?
Lied. When they asked him about being a part of the Palmer raids, and he said that he wasn't.
Okay, well, after that, he went and fired all the female agents and bans the FBI from, at that time, the Bureau of Intelligence for information from hiring women.
Oh, well, I mean, it's an interesting move to make as the acting director. Just
how do you use spies? Like, that's what you're trying to do is like have people do that kind of stuff. You're canceling out 50% of people that you can then send into. It's just a fucking stupid move.
At this point in time, too, we're talking about a different bureau. We're talking about a bureau that wasn't allowed to carry firearms. There weren't a whole lot of agents, and we'll talk about just the number of employees and agents at the time.
They were lawyers.
Yeah.
He tried to get people that had like law degrees and everything. He had a very specific, like clean cut, working class, like middle class guy that was, he never had a wife, but because he was married to the Bureau.
Never had a wife, ended up living in the house that he was born in with his mother until her death. I want to say he was like 43 years old.
Oh, I wanted to say that's who he wanted. See, there we go. He's trying to go ahead and project himself, but he also wants to make sure that they're taller and not as weird looking, because the man was 5'7", which I think plays into some of his anger.
There is a magic number there. I think that there's a deviation for anger with height.
I'm only 5'9", but I do have some type of anger toward things. So I'm speaking from
some personal experience. Yeah, May 10th, 1924, Hoover appoints him this fifth director of the Bureau. What the fuck? Oh! Wait a second. Just a second. We're having a material change here. Looks like Calvin Coolidge might have been the one that named him the director. I don't know if I wrote that down wrong. There's a lot of stuff here. We're going to be going for a while.
There's 8 presidents that it was 8 presidents that he served. So that's still huge.
Yeah. So Coolidge ends up bringing him on as this director after this thing called the Teapot Dome scandal. And basically it was a bribery scandal where these oil companies, I believe it was in Montana, ended up securing the rights to an area that they had to grease government's palms to get a hold of. And the director before him, William Burns, just basically like watched it happen. And I think Coolidge might have taken a little bit of exception to just watching that happen right in front of his very own eyes. Motherfucker. It wasn't Herbert Hoover. It's Hoover. It's J. Edgar.
I'm so confused.
When I said that Hoover appointed him,
yeah,
Hoover got appointed by Coolidge. I screwed up the presidents.
Okay.
So yeah, just strike part of that. And again, before he gets named this director by Coolidge, they ask him about his involvement in the Palmer raids again. And once again, he tells them that he was a part of the organization, but he had little to nothing to do with these raids, when we know, in fact, that he had a whole hell of a lot to do with these raids.
But had I been involved with the raids, I would have caught a lot more communists.
It would have gone better, yeah.
He somehow was able to probably spin it.
So at the beginning of his reign, and we're going to call it a reign because it goes on for 48 years.
He's only taken out of it by death.
The BOI had approximately 650 employees with 441 special agents who couldn't carry weapons and had a limited ability to arrest people. Mm-hmm. A lot of these raids that go on during the BOI days have to be, they have to bring in the police.
There's no such thing as a federal crime.
Yeah, there has to be a force to go in there.
Yeah.
And as you said, he starts cleaning out this agency. He starts kind of gearing it towards these young graduates. A guy named Clyde Tolson ends up coming from George Washington University.
Hey, Clyde.
And yeah, there's a very interesting relationship that him and old Clyde form. One of the other things that he hires is writers. He hires people that know how to put a positive spin on damn near anything.
What we would currently know as a public relations department.
He kind of creates this public relations department for the Bureau.
Not kind of. He does.
Well, but like, I think for most of government. Because the president obviously had public relations department at that point.
Yeah, but
I don't think there was a government agency that had
That's what I'm saying. Individuals had to do that for their roles, but an agency, there would be no reason that an agency that should be operating behind the scenes should ever need a public relations person.
No, if you're working above board, you shouldn't have to have somebody to spin it. It should be Hoover out there telling everybody what's going on. Throughout the 20s, he really reshapes the Bureau, as Chris said. He gets rid of all the women. These hiring statutes that he puts in with no people of color. Everybody is just going to kind of be clones of him, except for bigger, better, and better. One of the things that did fall under their purview, it came to fall under their purview, was these interstate crimes.
Yeah.
Because as your bank is being robbed in your state and these criminals are crossing state lines, you don't have somebody over in the other state waiting to pick them up.
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of, I like to try to imagine the progression of like crimes and everything. So in order to really perform a crime that could encompass multiple states, you had to either be right on the border, do something, and then just like get in a slower car and get across or do whatever. But this came at a time when this is going to be the age of Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger, Machine Gun Kelly, those kind of guys.
Barker gang.
Yep. And so they are robbing all these banks in the Midwest, but traveling across state lines. So there's no cohesive type investigation of trying to catch these people. Hoover steps in, sees this happening, is like, we need to do something about this. Like, this has got to be a federal crime, right? Someone needs to handle the federal crime aspect of this. So he's able to essentially kind of pull this crime wave that's going on with these bank robbers under his jurisdiction.
And again, when you start to talk about a time when the advent of cars and cars becoming fashionable and more people start to have them
faster,
more people start to steal them and they take them across state lines to try to hide these things. So they're in charge of looking into auto theft.
Or because you're able to escape further. If you know that you can't be followed by the cops from the previous state, why aren't you just heading for the border of another state? They almost made it too easy.
That's what I thought of when you were talking about like the birth of crimes and how it goes. Like the first people that just thought of that, and the police were coming up to the state line and they're like, what do we do? What do we do? We can't follow. We don't have any jurisdiction over there. How do we make this happen? And everybody just stops at the state line and the car keeps going.
I just see it as them standing on the other side and they're just like, hey, come over here. They're like, no, why? He's like, no, just like, we won't do anything. Just come over, come a little bit closer. No, they can't cross the line. I guess they can't cross it. They just start backing up a little bit. Like, hey, stop. No, we just want to talk to you. We're not going to do anything.
Don't go the other way. Come back this way. We'll talk about it. Everything will be okay.
They just take off running the other direction. Like, God damn it.
But by the 30s, we start hitting these Depression-era gangsters that Chris was talking about. You have the John Dillingers. You have the Machine Gun Kellys. You have the creepy Carpuses. And when all of this goes down, it kind of changes the image in the country of like these guys are in this Robin Hood role where these strings of banks in the Midwest are getting robbed and the newspapers are reporting on them, and they're in faster cars. They're in snazzy looking suits. They're carrying Tommy guns.
They're hanging off the running boards when they're rolling up to places. It's kind of fucking badass. I mean, they killed people, which was not cool, but the manner in which they arrived on the scene was pretty cool. One thing about this too is you have kind of with this age of the Tommy gun bank robbery, you start to kind of, this is at a time when the Depression, people are still recovering from it and everything. Mm-hmm. Who were the bad guys in the Depression?
Government.
And the banks.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden now you have these people that are sticking it to the banks who stuck it to all these other people during the Depression. People aren't going to feel bad because they're like, guess what? I don't have enough money to even have a fucking money in a bank right now. They're just stealing from the rich people that deserve it because they're the ones that caused the Depression in the first place.
Oh, no, something happened and now you guys don't have any money either? Boy, I can really relate to that.
And I'm guessing...
What'd you do for me?
Yeah,
nothing? Ah, shit.
I'm guessing they weren't as popular in the areas that they were actually robbing the banks and terrorizing people.
Probably not.
But from outside in the nation, they were just like, all right then.
And Hoover sees this as... we can try to restore the natural order of things. These guys are going outside of the norm and committing crimes that are heinous to us. And yes, killing people is always heinous. But as far as bank robbery goes, we've talked about it. It's not good. People shouldn't do it. I don't condone bank robbing.
It's the corruption of America.
At the same time,
what are the kids going to think?
Yeah, the list of crimes, it's fairly low in my personal opinion. And I think... like even sentencing, you don't get nearly enough time as you should for robbing a bank.
Oh, no.
Like it's years. It's not decades, I don't think.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
Dillinger becomes public enemy number one. Sweet ass movie, Public Enemies, that goes through this whole entire chase of J. Edgar trying to get a hold of Dillinger. They chase them up into Wisconsin, into this cabin up in the woods and completely bungle that raid. Dillinger escaped prison multiple times using just some goofy ass Three Stooges type tactics.
There was one time he escaped where it was the old carving the soap. I heard
and then black shoe polish.
It was soap or wood, but then put shoe polish on it. And then that just made me think of the other guys where he gives him the training gun and after it gets stolen and they lose it, they're like, they returned it and they put some type of like varnish. Is that like a lacquer?
Linseed oil?
Yeah.
You're going to write a thank you letter for that.
Mm-hmm.
So Dillinger really had their number. He becomes public enemy number one. And all they want to do is catch Dillinger, but he just keeps squeezing out of their hands until he runs into this issue in the Chicago theater where I guess Dillinger had this mistress. Her name was Anna Sage. She had some other issues as far as I think she didn't have any citizenship and was under the threat of deportation. Ends up going and speaking to a bureau agent, and the bureau agent says, hey, if you help us, we will get Dillinger. We'll make sure that you won't be in trouble.
I think she had previously dated a Chicago cop.
Oh, is that how?
And after she started the relationship with Dillinger, because she was trying to go ahead and stay in the country for her kid because she had a child, she went to the cop that she used to date. She's like, I know where Dillinger's going to be. He contacted the FBI, and then they kind of set this whole thing up, which was...
She's the woman in red.
She is. And this whole thing was put under the purview, it's actually kind of apt, of Melvin Purvis, which I wish this guy had a better name because this dude's a badass, but oh my God, the name, Melvin and Purvis.
Tough.
It's you had to be. It forced him to be this guy, having a name like that. And so they set up this operation. Dillinger comes out. He's with his bodyguard and then also the woman. And there's, FBI agents at different locations. And it was almost actually like Bosch because someone wasn't catching on one of Purvis's hand signals. Ends up, I think his bodyguard notifies Dillinger. He's like, there's something wrong. He goes to reach for a weapon or someone, shouts, Dillinger, stop. And as he goes to reach for his weapon, a couple agents open fire. Marksmanship. I don't know if they're using snub-nosed revolvers, so they're not that accurate, but ended up killing Dillinger, but then also two other people got shot.
They were leaving a theater, so it was a mass of people outside.
You shot into a fucking crowd.
Yeah, not a great. I'm not justifying them shooting other people. I'm just saying if you're not deadly accurate.
You're saying 1 out of 3 ain't bad. They got Dillinger in 2, but the other people didn't die, so I guess it's okay. But such was the end of John Dillinger. One of the kind of crazy stories that comes out of that is, so there was an interview with the people that were really close to where it was happening. John Dillinger got shot, fell in front of like this guy who was talking to his friend. His buddy pulls out a handkerchief and dips it into the blood. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "That's John Dillinger." And then a couple other people saw him do that and pull out their handkerchiefs and dipped it in too.
I don't know if they were selling these things or what, but that's an insane move to see a guy dead bleeding in front of you and you just dip into his blood.
It's your centerpiece at dinner parties.
Yeah.
You see that handkerchief? That's got Dillinger's blood on
Dilly's blood. I don't know who got the worst end of this. Dillinger obviously was killed, so that's pretty bad. Melvin Purvis, though, his star rises. He is the front forward face of the FBI when it comes time to talk about interviews or anything like that.
And he's good.
He does very well.
He's got the nerdiest, wholesome-sounding name. This guy would never do anything wrong. It's Melvin Purvis, for God's sakes.
Everybody was shocked that Melvin Purvis knew which way to point the gun.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the one that killed Dillinger. And that sat well with pretty much everybody except for J. Edgar.
He didn't even shoot Dillinger. He was just in charge of the operation. He didn't even fire. Hoover didn't even like being in the public spotlight, but he wanted the adoration and the accolades.
It's so weird to me.
Yeah.
And it just adds to this mystery of this guy.
I think that's what it was. He didn't want to be in the public eye, but he wanted people to always associate the name J. Edgar Hoover with the positive things that he had done or taken credit for.
And because of this, Hoover makes Purvis's life a living hell within the Bureau.
I think Purvis ended up doing 2 different things. He ended up doing 2 raids that were both successful against like the one with Dillinger, and then another one was against a gang. I can't remember what the name it was, but he also got a ton of shine for that. And people are like, this is like super agent Dillinger and now this. And it was after that I think Hoover ended up sending him to, where was the field office? It might've been somewhere in Wisconsin or Michigan. And basically just had him traveling around the area doing like spot checks at all these other FBI offices.
He just buried him within the Bureau. He just completely said, hey, if you're going to take all the adoration for this and all the love for this and I'm not getting anything, your life is going to pay.
It's the exact thing that you hear sometimes about, like, I'm going to send you to a posting in like Alaska. Like you always hear about that type of repercussion. Yeah, it's real and he did it.
But at the same time, you knocked off number one. You knocked off public enemy number one. 1933, prior to that, they nail MGK. 1934, they nailed Dillinger. 1935, under FDR, we have the New Deal where everything gets blown up, where there's all sorts of money flowing into these different agencies. The BOI gets restructured into the FBI. Hoover takes some of that money and kind of creates this new law enforcement school and FBI laboratory. I know the word laboratory in 1935 probably isn't a whole lot, but what they do is they start focusing on fingerprinting. I don't know the way that they would procure a fingerprint at a crime scene, but I can't think that it would be terribly accurate to be able to compare it to another fingerprint that they took at a police office that then gets shipped to the FBI?
I don't think it was at that stage like what you're thinking. The way I see it is they were using it in case they had that full database of all these other places. They tried to compile the largest fingerprint database. If somebody got caught for something in another state or did something that they were looking for, they could then cross-reference those fingerprints against something the FBI possibly had on file and then try to compare them. My question is, who's doing this? Is this like some person who is like a former art student or something? Like this is
all the perps are making hand turkeys.
Well, no, not in that respect. Sorry.
Okay.
I mean, you got to have arts and crafts time. I mean, celebrating Thanksgiving. No, what I mean is, this is kind of part of this was inspired, I think, by Hoover taking a trip to like the Canadian version of the FBI or whatever they had and seeing that they had this lab. So Hoover decides to create the FBI lab, which is going to become famous for the FBI index and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm thinking is when you're developing this fingerprint database, who's doing the comparisons? You got to sit there with a magnifying glass. You're trying to look between the two fingerprints to see if they match up and have like shared curves or grooves or whatever the hell you're looking for. But
Loops and
who is
swoops.
doing this? You just have a guy. You're like, that's actually John. He's the fingerprint guy. Oh yeah, what did he used to do? He actually used to be like a diamond appraiser, like or appraisal, appraising jewelry. But no, he just comes in here and he looks at the fingerprints. So a lot of stuff relies on John, right? Like, oh yeah, like identification of people to determine if they're guilty or innocent relies on John. Okay, seems like a lot of pressure for a guy.
A lot of weight on John's shoulders, especially in a new industry where I don't think they really understand like dermal ridges and what actually makes a fingerprint. But
does John drink? Oh, heavily. You don't think that's problematic?
How come? He says he has a guilty conscience, but we can't figure out why. So yeah, he's kind of creating these backbones. I think the the School of Law Enforcement, is that Quantico?
I don't know.
I know that's
I've heard the name, but
a teaching school. But yeah, he's starting to flesh out this FBI into this greater bureau. And along with that, in 1936, we run into him going and asking for more money in front of Congress. And Edgar runs into, I forgot the senator's name, but he asked him about arrests, and he asked Hoover.
It wasn't Wild Bill, was it?
I don't think it was. It might have been. Somebody definitely challenged him and asked him if he had ever personally arrested anybody. And he started launching into this big, long speech about they arrested this person and that person, this person, that person. And he goes, no. Have you personally arrested anybody?
Yeah, you're top cop.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. The director of the FBI is supposed to be the top cop in the nation, everything. If you haven't performed essentially the basic duty that you're asking for your agency to do, it's not gonna mean you're gonna be completely incompetent at the job, but it does question your credibility and your credentials on what your experience is.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you now have Hoover like, I'm going to show this motherfucker. I'm going to make sure I get the next arrest. So we come to Alvin Creepy Karpis.
Of Alcatraz episode fame.
Also, Machine Gun Kelly was in Alcatraz.
Yes, he was.
So you have Karpis, who ends up getting arrested, I want to say was it down in Florida somewhere?
I think so, because he was a part of the Barker gang, and I think they had taken them potentially in earlier.
Yeah, so they, through information through the FBI pipeline, they find out that Karpis is down in, and I'm not sure exactly what state it is. I probably should have written that down. But
immaterial.
Somewhere in the South. And so Hoover gets notified of this. He ends up flying down, assembling a team that's going to go ahead and arrest him. They're monitoring the house. Karpis comes out, another guy with him. They go to get in a car, and as the story that the FBI and Hoover tell it is, as he's in the car, Hoover runs out and reaches through the window into the car and is like, I got you son of a bitch.
Turn off the engine.
Turn off the engine. So as it's told by Hoover and the FBI, Hoover literally personally arrests Karpis.
He apprehended.
Now, part of this says, yeah, he actually even stopped him and grabbed his arm because he started reaching for a rifle in the back seat. And that's what Hoover's story about it is. The car that Karpis was in didn't even have a back seat.
Oh, that's convenient. That's weird. I wonder how he reached into the back seat then.
Exactly. What actually happened, and this comes from, I think, a biography or like something that Karpis had actually written.
I think this is actually what the agency wrote down in their notes.
Okay. Hoover is there, but he's like back waiting in a car. And after they arrest Karpis, like 5-10 minutes later, when someone comes in and knocks on his window and is like, the area is secure, everything is safe for you. He basically walks up to the window where Karpis is and he's like, ha, gotcha, fucker. I arrested you. And so that's what all the headlines, because again, he's created this PR department, and part of this department's job as all other PR departments, is to make these personal connections with the people who are going to be presenting the news.
Smart.
And so this PR department has these relationships with different journalists that, the only information coming out of the FBI about these arrests and everything is from this PR department. So, of course, they're just going to take anything that they can get from there because they want to report on the hot stories. They want that, that readership. And so you're getting these very tailored, manicured, curated stories that are coming out that are only painting Hoover in this positive light. He's the epitome of the American lawman, and anybody that works for the FBI is the same. They're these inflappable agents. And that's all just coming from the spin machine. I'm not saying he's not making arrests. He's not doing them himself. He's in charge of doing this kind of stuff. And up to this point, we're talking about some pretty positive things that he's doing. He's taken down, the 30s era gangsters, but this is what also kind of plants the seeds and shows you what type of person he is for the actions that he's going to take very quickly after this.
Well, and it's also a situation in the media where that all of these guys all these gangsters that you were just writing headlines about and stories about, they sold papers. Mm-hmm. Now you see them getting caught and you want to be able to write those stories about the courageous FBI agents that did it. If you maybe weren't as loving in some of your articles about what the Bureau was doing, Hoover would pick and choose the people that were writing these articles to give other people information that had been flattering towards him in the agency.
That's standard nowadays. You only pick, reporters and stuff in the newsroom to ask you questions and stuff like that.
Yeah, it kind of becomes this thing where he's building these relationships with these journalists to where when it comes time for them to maybe write a piece or the FBI says, we've done something new, would you like to write about it?
Or to write a counterpiece to somebody else's piece.
Yes. Instead of just having these journalists write their own, if they agree to it, the FBI says, that's great. We actually have written an article for you. Mm-hmm. If you just want to maybe skim it, clean up the language a little bit, whatever you want to do to put your spin on it.
But then send it back to us because we have to make sure that we approve it.
We get the final say on all this stuff. So he's creating this media machine that is growing within the FBI, is starting to reach out and get a hold of journalists that are starting to, like you say, write counter articles to anybody that's questioning their methods, but also kind of write these puff pieces that were produced by these writers that he hired in the FBI.
We're now coming also to a time where we're either close to, maybe just out of, I think we might be in it a little bit as well, prohibition.
Oh, yeah.
And if you've listened to we did do a prohibition episode, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, just making sure. It's been a while. You have the people that are actually running the marketing of illegal liquor sales and everything, and that's going to actually be the mob. A new type of gangster for this new type of world. Well, there's just a slight problem. Edward doesn't really believe that the mob is really a thing or any type of a threat. So he does the only thing that he can think to do. He just pretty much just denies that there's any existence of any organized crime within the United States.
If you ignore it, it'll go, are they robbing banks? No? Okay, then they're probably all right. Mm-hmm. We're just going to completely deny their existence.
And why is it? Why would it be that someone with the desire to clean up America and everything like that, everything needs to be under the rule of law. Why would you just and it's blatantly obvious that there is organized crime. Why would you just let this operate under your nose? I have some theories, but let's take a bathroom break.
Okay.
Oh my God, Adam. What is that up in the sky? It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's socials. Oh my God. It's faster than Instagram.
That's historically high pod on Instagram.
More powerful than X?
It's historically high, historically HI on X.
Able to leap tall threads in a single bound.
Back to historically high pod on Threads.
And, I guess there's still Gmail, right?
We got that too. That is historically high podcast at gmail.com.
All right, guys, back to the show. All right, so we're going to come back to the mob here after this piece, but I have a thought. So Hoover only paid his agents, I'm trying to think what it was. It was like $5,000 a year.
Which back then, not a terribly low amount of money, but you're not getting rich.
But the people that he would be sending the undercovers in with would pay a lot more.
Informants.
And so part of it is that and I don't know if he, thought fighting the mob was just a waste of the resources and everything. I think it was secretly the fact, there may be another reason, we'll talk about that in a second, but the fact that he didn't trust his guys, because that was the whole point of like the image of the FBI agent was this infallible, incorruptible status symbol.
Well, and there is a difference between chasing gangs and the mob, too. A gang, you might have 8 guys, 10 guys max, whereas the mob, you have hierarchy of soldiers.
Do you think the organized aspect of it was just kind of like, oh, fuck, they're not just rolling up on banks on the running boards of like a Ford?
Yeah, these guys might have put more than 10 minutes of thought into this plan,
exactly.
Whatever they got going on. Coming up into World War II, it's so interesting how, looking at this now and knowing what we know between the FBI and the CIA, there was this push during World War II. FDR wanted to kind of broaden into more of an international presence.
So CIA isn't a thing at this time.
No.
It's okay. So
I think it's even pre-OSS, isn't it?
This is still pre-OSS. Okay. So really kind of the only intelligence gathering apparatus is the FBI at this point, because I'm sure there were minor international espionage type things, people that we had in different countries as far as like consuls or ambassadors, things like that, sending back information, but there wasn't a dedicated department to handle that. The war pretty much showed that was going to be, or the lead up to the war even showed that was going to be a necessity to know what was going on in pretty much all aspects of the world.
So Hoover knows kind of where he needs to start. He goes to FDR and he requests the ability to wiretap potential Nazis and communist agents that are living in the United States. Mm-hmm. There was some back and forth on this. Hoover kind of pushed his way into this and was given permission. And he was given kind of a statutes of what he could do, what he couldn't expand beyond, anything like that. Pretty much immediately after he gets permission, he just wildly oversteps the purview of what he was given.
The terminology. So yeah, FDR is like thumbs up on suspected subversive persons committing subversive activities. This was to catch not only Nazis, but also, what we should do? We should throw in like the fascists from Italy. Yeah. And then also, we're still worried about communism, so we might as well make sure. I know they're fighting with us technically, but we want to make sure we're not losing to them over here. So we're just going to wiretap anybody and I think it's that term, anybody participating in subversive acts.
Which
it's you can say it depends on what your viewpoint is.
Yeah. And I think that's those parameters that are given for what it is. You can kind of justify subversive acts depending on the day, your mood. If somebody didn't shake your hand, like there's a lot of subversive acts that you could kind of draw into there.
So here's kind of an interesting thing relating to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Did you read about this or hear about this?
Yeah, go ahead though.
There was this guy.
This is your lane.
Okay. There was this guy named Dusko Popov. Fucking awesome name.
Sweet.
This guy was a Russian-German. Oh shit. It was Russian-German something. Might have been British, but he was almost like, it was almost like the Germans thought he was a spy and spying on Russia, but he was like a double or triple agent. So he had actually been working with the British and provided the British this document that the Germans gave to him because the Germans thought he was working for them. It was a questionnaire regarding the defenses of Pearl Harbor. This Popov guy hands it to British intelligence and is like, hey, you might want to pass this along to the United States.
They might want to see this.
The Brits end up sending this German document over to the FBI. Nothing. Hoover had intel 4 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor.
The Germans knew Japan's intentions.
Japan had probably gone to the Germans and was like, is there any way you can get this? We're already trying to seek this information ourselves and we're working on it. But if you can give us too much information isn't going to hurt us here. But this was something that Hoover never told anyone and kept to himself.
he did have a pretty strong distrust for double agents. And I'm not saying that this is any sort of justification for this.
You pass it up to Naval Command and you let them make that determination on what they're going to do. And at that point you say, after I gave it to them, whatever they decided to do was on them. But at the same time, no one's going to slap you on the hand for giving that information. And I don't think I was in my right mind when I texted you that last night when I was asking about, because Hoover also had this desire that we'll talk about like next to be not only the domestic intelligence service, but to be the worldwide for the United States intelligence gathering service. He wanted to cast that net across the entire globe. When he hears this information, again, we're in Lend-Lease at this point. America is not getting into the war, but we know that there's a buildup. If it seems inevitable, because I can't get the feeling that's what it was, there was just needing to be that push to get in there.
Yeah, we were a support role. We wanted to figure out how to get our feet wet.
When we get into the war, regardless of who causes it, we're getting into the war with Germany and over in Europe, right? If you know that Pearl Harbor is going to be attacked and you say nothing, that kind of, and this is tinfoil hat shit probably, but that makes me think like, if your goal is to try to get your hat into international espionage, the way the government is going to give you that ability is if we need that overseas because we're in a war. And if we can get in a war, all they have to do is really, maybe they'll just, well, how bad can the attack on Pearl Harbor be? Like, what can the Japanese do? Like,
they're so far away.
I know, exactly. What are they going to do? They might set off a couple bombs as like maybe some like, sneak attack shit. No, they definitely can't bring over 6 aircraft carriers and completely decimate the Pacific Fleet.
The Japanese aren't communists. They're not arsonists, or they're not anarchists. They can't. What can they do? It turns out that we found out, the hard way of what they can do. Hoover kind of starts to jockey for this position in worldwide intelligence service business against the former competitor that he was up against, Wild Bill Donovan. When he was gunning for the director of the BOI.
Bill Donovan's not even a good guy, and he's dumb. But guess what? He's opposite of Hoover. So you got to support him.
Bill Donovan, very dumb. We're not going to really dive into a whole lot of just how dumb he was. At one point in time, he had agreed in principle with the NVBD, the Russians. NKVD.
Maybe.
To do like a home at home type situation where we were allowed to send OSS agents.
An exchange program. You guys go ahead and bring some of your like pre-KGB people over here. We'll send some of our people over there. And then may the best spies win.
Yeah, the OSS is created. It's kind of the front runner to what would become the office, or the forerunner for what would become the CIA.
The OSS is Office of Strategic Services.
I think. Yeah. And Donovan running the OSS for some reason has this brilliant idea to pitch this to the Russians, and immediately when Hoover hears about it, he what? He's willingly inviting communists into this country as spies just for the mere chance that we can no. We can just send them into Russia and have our own spies over there. We don't have to change in exchange for what's going on. And FDR's like, you're making a lot of sense. Bill seems like kind of an idiot. That was probably a bad idea, move on Bill's part. And Truman would actually be the one that sacks this whole OSS and creates the CIA.
So the OSS was created in response to World War II. I don't know if it was ever planned to carry on that. It was essentially just to serve as kind of this special operations also between us and the British and our allies. What that ended up letting us know is that we needed an international intelligence gathering agency. But what Truman saw was that what we just literally saw in fucking Nazi Germany, what the Gestapo were doing. And Truman ended up coming out with a quote after I think he had left office. But he wrote that during his presidency, he says, "We want no Gestapo or secret police. The FBI is trending in that direction. They're dabbling in sex life scandals and plain blackmail. Edgar Hoover would give his right eye to take over, and all congressmen and senators are afraid of him." So, and this was something that he had written down after he got out of office, reflecting back on his presidency about it. But he saw that essentially providing that type of power to Hoover was not going to turn out well. And even without that type of power, because the OSS ends up kind of leading the way and paving the way for the CIA, which, fun little factoid, in case you guys didn't know, the CIA isn't allowed to plan operations on like domestic soil. That's the FBI's turf. The FBI is not allowed to plan operations or, execute operations on international terms. That's all the CIA's purview. So that's why kind of there's the separation between those two.
And there's different exclusions for if it's a foreign entity, the CIA will work with the FBI if it's on American soil.
I don't think they'd like to work
vice
together.
versa.
That's got to be one of the biggest, like, if you're thinking about it, like Democrat, Republican, all that kind of shit, there's got to be some inter-office rivalry.
Yeah, I could see that. FBI wants its brand to grow. They actually I don't remember, I believe it was, they were propositioned for this idea of this radio series that could be put out, and then eventually they will be propositioned for a TV series. And the FBI, Hoover looks at this and he says, this is probably not a terrible idea. We can tell these stories of all of these great criminals that we caught and how we caught them. And at the same time, I can also punch up these other stories that may not have been that bad.
And sensationalized stuff.
Yeah.
You're planning, your PR apparatus is now just not reporting on the stories of things that are happening. You're constantly there. In the beginning with the radio show, you're in people's homes. They're listening to these stories about the heroic FBI, painting this image all over the public of just basically this pillar of protection of, democracy and everything. And then eventually, as that turns into the television show, now people are actually being able to see the agents and they're going to be able to see the workings, because this show is actually shot at the FBI office, or at least some of it is shot at the FBI office.
Who's just going to the FBI office?
Yeah, no one.
That's crazy.
And so regardless of, when they're submitting scripts for this show and pitching and everything is going to be done and approved by either J. Edgar or the PR team there at the FBI. But they're also really wary. They're like, too many killings. There's 5 killings in this episode. Maybe 1, and it's not going to be the FBI that's doing it. It needs to be the bad guy that's doing it. So they're also trying to paint this image of being this, not this violent apparatus or anything like that.
A bit of a Nintendo approach.
Yes, yeah.
To what's going on. But yeah, as Chris said, every one of these scripts had to be approved by the Bureau. The stories would include these punched up versions because they could control this narrative now. Like, there's nobody else knows this stuff. They're not privy to the actual information of these cases. So if you're looking for, a little extra credit for something, you're going to make someone that was shot in the back during a raid, be facing forward and shooting at the FBI who was dodging these bullets before they neutralize the threat.
Yeah. All you have to do is maintain somewhat consistency with the media reporting of what went down, not contradict that too much.
You also got to tell the media what happened.
Exactly. So you're already good there. And then anything that wasn't reported in the media, it's like fair game. Yeah. No one can question it because they don't have any information about it except what you're providing them.
And we get out of the war and we come to this time when the Cold War is becoming a real thing. And Truman goes to Hoover and he's like, golly, this Cold War's not going good. The commies are really after us. I wish that there was some sort of surveillance or maybe some information that we had about communists that are in the country now. Do you know of anything, J. Edgar, as the leader of the FBI, about maybe surveilling communists potentially?
He's just rock hard. Like Ron Burgundy walking out of his office hard.
Yeah.
During the 50s, when the Korean War kicked off, Hoover had put in a request to suspend habeas corpus.
Wild.
Yeah, for 12,000 people that he had deemed on this subversive persons list that would be able to be arrested and detained, like, without question in the case of a national emergency. And he used the Korean War to try to get this thing pushed through. Fortunately, it did not go through. just, anyone suspected of disloyalty to America, that could be just speaking out about how you're not currently happy with the decision that the administration did, and someone overhears it and reports you.
And it was. The people that were actively speaking out against the war in pretty much all wars were arrested for subversive behaviors towards the country.
Yeah. Unfortunately, with this proposal, Truman didn't pull the trigger on it, but you still did have instances about them trumping up charges and stuff like that to actually be able to do this with a warrant or whatnot.
Yeah. And Hoover has all of these mechanisms at his disposal. He's already done a lot of research into these communist parties to be able to look at who's speaking out against what and why. So he already kind of has a background on what's going on. The FBI had compiled this list of names called the Custodial Detention List. Basically, it was people that might pose a threat to be jailed without reason, basically, if there's a threat to national security during wartime or any sort of like threats on our own soil. There was 3 rankings. A was the highest risk. If anything jumps off, if anything pops off, we just imprison these people just because they're going to be the most dangerous. B, they're less dangerous, but we still need to monitor them all the time.
We'll get to them after the first people.
C is going to be just sympathizers that they need to keep updated lists on about what's going on, updated dossiers, basically.
If we get bored and don't have enough work to fill.
Yeah. And the individual dossiers were made on these people. They use wiretaps. They would steal their mail, open it, read it, check all this stuff out.
When we say wiretaps, we're just leaving illegal off of it because all of these are going to be illegal. Yeah.
And if I'm being honest, I don't really know how a wiretap would work back then. I can't tell you how in the world you would be able to bug a phone back then.
So you had bugs, and I think you had wiretaps.
Okay.
A wiretap would essentially be, maybe you could do it at the phone company. I don't know if it was still women pulling switchboards and all that. I don't know at that point.
So you crawling up telephone poles maybe and cutting wires and splicing.
I don't know. I know that they had bugs that they could plant, which had to be pretty sizable. So you had to get real creative about hiding those. But yeah, illegally planting, you basically had infiltration, burglaries, illegal wiretaps. You get planting forged documents and basically discredit in the media to try to ruin someone's character by reporting these things to all these friendly journalists. And this is where we get the birth of COINTELPRO.
So before that, just to get back to this list, when the Attorney General saw this list, he's like, what in the fuck is that? Hoover goes, hey, it's a list of people that we kind of need to keep an eye on if anything goes off. And the AG goes, that's going to end because that's completely illegal. You need to scrap that list. You need to get rid of all this stuff.
Have you read the Constitution?
Yeah. This thing that you're holding is the shining pillar of this beautiful country that you love so much that you want to see to say the same. You just wiped your ass with that and created this document. Like you started writing on your
You're supposed to be the law, not exempt from the law.
He was so pissed off, and Hoover obliges. Hoover goes, okay, no more of that list. That list is done. We're getting rid of that list. Before we get rid of that list, I'm going to go back to my boys, and we create this thing called the Security Index that is the exact same document that was just copied over on something new, and then they threw the old one away, and then they just continued working on it under a different name of the Security Index. So we're not even like, hey, where did you guys get all this information for the Security Index? Oh, well, it was from the other list that you guys told us to get rid of.
We literally just took the papers out of one folder and just slipped them into a different colored folder.
There's just no checks on this guy whatsoever. It's just everything is just a handshake deal.
And this is, again, done under this auspice of this is a communist threat. This is always going to be what he goes back to. And the reason it's so successful during this time frame is because this is the age of McCarthyism. Senator Joseph McCarthy, correct?
Yes.
And
from Wisconsin.
Yep. And so this is where we get what's known as the Second Red Scare. And McCarthy and Hoover essentially just bonded, and their relationship was based on nothing but commie hate. And so in that, they were allies. They were going to support each other. And
they could smell it on each other. It was
just two dogs smelling each other's assholes, walking in a circle.
Pheromones were flying between these two dudes.
So McCarthyism was essentially this fear-mongering about communism's takeover in the United States. And it was real hot in the late 40s and early 50s. Its peak was in 1956. And what this basically allowed is Hoover wanted to do all the things that McCarthy was actually putting forward that we need to do for national security. But Hoover wasn't talking about it.
Yeah, he needed a mouthpiece.
He had this mouthpiece, and anytime that, even if this guy's public opinion took a dive or this guy was, ostracized or ousted, he wasn't hitched to that. It was allowing him almost a smokescreen, but it also allowed this fear mongering to then allow him to get these types of like proposals and everything put through.
It's one thing if the director of the FBI is telling you that he wants to do something. It's different when McCarthy is sitting there on Capitol Hill screaming about needing it to happen.
I can't believe I'm even saying this, but McCarthy, one of his focuses in this McCarthyism was on public health, vaccines, mental health, and fluoride being used as communist tools to either poison or brainwash people. Why does that sound so fucking familiar?
Yeah, there's a lot in that sentence. Kind of a way that he would use McCarthy as a puppet is he would teach him how to talk about communism. Mm-hmm. There were points in times when McCarthy would be doing interviews and he would say something like, "We know of 39 active communists in this area." And Hoover would pull him in and be like, "Great job. Love the messaging. Need to tweak it a little bit. Don't ever put a number on it. A number is an exact figure that you believe that we know.
If you don't hit that number, people are going to expect that they're still out there. You failed.
All you need to say is that there are active communists. There is a number of active communists. Shape the message."
One is a number, I guess.
Exactly, yeah. Shape the message to the ability to scare people, but also at the same time give yourself some leeway. And there's different points in time where Hoover has admitted that basically, if I can make this sound completely exaggerated and terrible, this threat of communism, it's going to ensure that we have financial aid from the government. It's going to bolster public support for the FBI, and we're just going to look better. The worse we can make communism, the more money that we get, basically, is the way that he approaches this. And McCarthy is running this Red Scare ragged. He is going after everybody that he can once he gets this bone from Hoover. And then he goes one step too far.
He puts a number to it. He does exactly what Hoover told him not to do. Not only that, he aimed it at the wrong person that you should be aiming it at, because he claims that, I think it was in 1950, he claimed to have a list of these members of the Communist Party and members of like a spy ring that were working within the Truman administration in the State Department. I think the number he put it at was like 200.
He also went after the military, too.
Yes.
And you can't go after the cabinet.
And the military. Pick one, man. Pick one to go after. Don't go after. You don't fight a war on two fronts. We just saw that a couple years ago.
Immediately after this happens, Hoover goes, "All right, anybody that's feeding information to McCarthy, shut up. You're not telling him another word."
Yep.
And once he runs out of talking points, he's going to run out of steam very quickly. I think that he was also going to be making a bid for the presidency. Also didn't do well, just like the first Red Scare with the Palmer raids.
It pretty much, as far as McCarthy goes, that right there and a combination of a few other things pretty much just killed him. Too many false claims and basically hedging his bets on things that never, happened, threats that never actually happened. And it's that thing where people started to get like red fatigue, I think is what it was. Is you're just
I can imagine. I got red fatigue from doing this episode.
Yeah, no shit. You're just getting hit with this over and over and over again. And yeah, it's scary when it first comes out. It's kind of like COVID in a way, where when it first came out, you're being so cautious and you're like looking around and you're trying to be, you're scared. And then as it goes on and everything, and yeah, maybe you catch it one time and you're like, okay, I survived. But then eventually you do just get that, like, you forget the face mask at home and you're like, I'm not turning around to get it. Like, people just got to the point where it was like, listen, you've been freaking us out about the communists for so long. We haven't seen one.
Yeah.
We've maybe heard about a couple, but never in a capacity where they were actually having any type of impact. And part of that was also the fault of the FBI. There was a point in which, because they were making it so fucking hard to be a member of, the Communist Party or even have any of those leanings, that the party numbers just completely dwindled down to the point where I think they had something in the neighborhood of like, was it 35, was like 10,000 members toward the end, and 1,500 of those members were FBI informants.
I think it was like 4,000. I don't even think it was five digits.
But it was 1,500 of them were FBI
1,500 were FBI agents. So just imagine this at FBI headquarters when somebody comes in like, boss, went to a meeting last night, got a hot lead. Brad Thompson, he's one of ours. Okay, shit. Charles Burke. We installed him like a month ago. And he just keeps naming people. It's like FBI informant, FBI informant, FBI informant. And he gets to the end of the list. He's like, I don't have anybody else.
He's like, we did it. We stamped out communism. Hoover, the door just shuts. He's like, shut your mouth. You were never to utter that again. It's always a threat.
It's the old playbook that he just repeatedly goes back to. And he just beats it into the ground. And every single time he does it, for some reason, everybody kind of jumps. COINTELPRO, the episode that we did about it, I truly, really enjoyed. It was one of my favorites that we've done. First target it aims itself at, the CPUSA, and this is what Chris is talking about. They're hitting these black bag jobs. This has moved up from just mere robberies to now where they're going in and they're just specifically looking for paperwork on anything that they can get a hold of. They're planting different paperwork in there. They're using wiretaps on all these people, however in the hell they used it. These undercovers that are basically snitching on themselves, because that's really all that's left in the party is just going back and forth. They're sending disruptors into their meetings to try to start arguments and to spread rumors about all of this different shit that's going on. It's just a full-throated attack. COINTELPRO is like a very boiled down version of what the FBI was doing before. Now it's just more secret and more dangerous.
Yeah. And with that, you still have this PR department that not only is the PR department in there, but now you have two writers that were actually hired to come in to actually write episodes for this TV show to make sure that they met all of Hoover's standards. But you still have these relationships with these journalists who are still the ones getting this information about these, communist movements and these threats and everything. And these are still selling papers.
Yeah.
Because they're only coming from a select number. It's not like there's a flood, there's a flood of the scare, but there's not a flood of information. It's coming from these select journalists, and they're just basically writing these puff pieces.
Yeah, they're using the media to basically spread their own propaganda, and they know how to do it because these writers that are writing these pieces that go out into the public are very good things.
And you had also people that were finding out about these black bag jobs and this kind of stuff that had sources that were able to track down and verify information that there was illegal activities going on. And there would be these smaller journalists that would report on this because, again, larger publications had to have airtight, information about this kind of stuff. You can maybe get away with a little bit less at like a smaller where there's not as much risk. But anytime these stories would come out pointing to something, negative about Hoover, the operation, or the FBI in general, you would then have an immediate counter argument or counter article that was written by one of these friendly journalists that would address that directly and then spin it to paint the FBI in, the most positive light it could.
There's a point in time where he has I don't know if he's a friend, I would call him maybe a good work partner in this journalist that works for the ACLU and the American Civil Liberties Union. And he basically is saying, you've seen all the good work that we do. We always scratch your back when you need something. Whenever you come calling about something, we always give you the 100% truth about everything. Guy agrees to it. He goes, what would you think about maybe writing a piece on us? We'll give you all of this exclusive information. We'll give you access to so many archives and all this kind of stuff. And the American Civil Liberties Union guy goes, sure. Send over the article. I'll look at it. I will make any kind of changes or anything like that. Anything that I learn from what you guys are sharing with me, I can put in, send it back to you. You guys rubber stamp it, and I will put it up. And once this ACLU article comes out, it's just basically like a free pass for any time Hoover gets questioned about anything. He can hold it up and he says, I'm upholding civil liberties. Look at what the ACLU said about me. It's a blank check.
It's I have a black friend.
Yeah, okay. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is.
Just to talk about this reach, this is your FBI. Ran 409 total radio programs from 1945 to 1953. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation book that was authored, quote unquote, by Hoover gets released in 1941. The reason that I say authored is because this was written by those FBI writers and then just put Hoover's name on it. This wasn't a ghostwriting situation. This was just these dudes were writing something and then they put Hoover's name at the bottom.
So just a fun fact, the only person allowed at the FBI to use blue ink was Hoover. So anytime you saw notations or scribbles or anything like that, you knew directly when it was coming from him. Straight from the top. Masters of Deceit was written in 1958, again by Hoover, just a prolific writer in his day. The proceeds of these things were being donated to something called the FBI Recreational Association. I'm sure this was a nonprofit. I don't know if they purchased like row machines for the different FBI offices. Yeah. Calisthenics equipment.
Yeah, for the softball team too. Like
you got to have basketballs. You got to have hoops. Yeah.
It turns out that they were doing none of that. This was just a private slush fund that Hoover had created for himself and kind of the other higher-ups in his other deputies that are within the FBI. There's no oversight to be like, okay, so you've got a book issued about it, a couple of them. There's a radio show. There's a TV show. So are we doing all this for free? Yeah. Is all this pro bono? No, we're making money from this, and no one is like, where's the money going? They're like, it's actually going in our recreational fund and everything. We like to have like, barbecues and cook for the guys, so we got to buy like a grill and all the food and that kind of stuff. And then sometimes we like to do a family day in the park. So, it's just that kind of stuff. It's totally not at all illegal or nefarious. We're not looking into Hoover washing his money through a foundation that he created or an association that he created. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not going to vet that at all. This is government money that should be government money that's not getting taxed or anything like that and going into the slush fund. Hoover used it for all sorts of stuff. He would remodel his house. I'm sure after his mom kicked the bucket, he probably wanted to do a little remodel. He probably taxidermied her and put her in a rocking chair. Non-zero chance. Cointo Pro, like we say, it blew up the CPUSA that it was already sort of in charge of. Its next fight was against civil rights groups, and they come under observation for these far left ties, this disruption of the norm that they're creating by looking to try to be treated equally. As odd as that sounds. The Southern Conference, the SCLC, and MLK. There you go. Run afoul of Hoover. MLK's star is growing into the 60s, and you kind of start to have this look of these people are disrupting the norm like we were just talking about. I don't like it. They seem to be pretty liberal. They're talking about equality. Communism. Far left. Communists. Uh-huh. They have to be communists. They'll have to be communists, so we have to figure out how to stamp out the Reds, and this will stop the civil rights movement. While this whole thing is going on, as Chris alluded to much earlier, there was a blind spot for Hoover and the Mafia. This blind spot goes all the way to 1957, where there was this Appalachian meeting. It was I believe it was the 5 families that were meeting up in this cabin. I believe it was in upstate New York. For the best Italian meal you've ever seen in your life. Great chance. A lot of Nonas in there cooking. And this whole thing is going on, and the FBI has no idea. They have no clue what's going on. They end up trying to kind of figure out some inroads after this, because once the story gets out that these 5 families all escaped this Appalachian compound. Ring, ring. This is J. Edgar. Hey, Mr. Hoover. What the fuck? We're looking at a news article here that there were 5 mob families, and it looks like they all just drove away, without, anything. Did you know anything about that? Any comment on the mob? Great alcohol, good meal.
Excellent suggestions on bets for horse racing.
Exactly. So once he kind of gets this look on his face, like, "Hey, we screwed up. I got a little mud on me here," possibly because of this potential issue that he's faced with the mafia this entire time. He knows that it's time to step up. Now, I think Chris was talking about a potential theory for as to why he might have sidestepped the mafia. And I don't really think it's a theory. I'm pretty much in full belief with this.
So, Clyde Tolson. Now, Clyde Tolson
Good guy, I'm sure.
Yeah. Clyde, he was associated with Hoover, I'm not sure. He was with Hoover. He was his right-hand man. I think he was the deputy from the time that Hoover became deputy. There might have been a little bit of time when he wasn't.
He was, I believe, 3 years younger, so he graduated 3 years after Hoover did from George Washington.
Okay.
Same school, alumni.
So he had been like his second the entire time up to this point, his most trusted confidant. Well, it seems like it probably went a little bit further than that.
Deeper, you mean?
Yeah, a little bit deeper. I can't even count how many types of stories there are about Hoover's sexuality and everything. And I'm not saying that like in a negative way. What I'm saying is I think the fact that he had to hide his relationship with Tolson left him with a lot of animosity that he took out on a lot of other different groups.
I'm not going to make this blanket statement for historically high. I'm sure Chris could agree with this when I say this. We're never going to judge somebody based upon their sexuality as long as it's two consenting adults. There's no animals involved. Unless you are persecuting other people for having a different sexuality and you are doing something that you deem deviant for everybody else, but is just fine for you in your personal life.
I don't judge you by the content of what you put in your holes or what holes you put yourself into, but by the content of your character.
Yeah. If you are going to reassign FBI agents for potentially being homosexual,
fire people just off rumors and stuff.
Yeah. If you're going to make their lives a living hell because they're not doing your job or what you want them to do, so you are going to make a rumor about them being gay or find out that they're gay and then use that against them, we're going to rip into you pretty good for being gay yourself and trying to cover it up.
When it comes down to it, part of the suspicion that Hoover really didn't go after organized crime was Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello might have had some pictures of him and Clyde getting busy. And as far as Hoover was concerned, that was the same kind of shit that he knew could take down other people and could also take down himself. So he might have just kind of steered away and let them kind of fly under their radar. There may have been an understanding of like, don't get too big.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. And I won't have to come after you guys. And then you won't have to release the photos of me getting railed by Mr. Tolson.
Or vice versa.
Yeah. I like to imagine he was a power bottom.
Yeah. So
generating a tremendous amount of power from the bottom.
Wonder if he was an otter, just being a littler guy.
No.
If he was a cub, maybe.
Yeah.
One of the things that kind of backs this up, and again, we're not saying this is 100% sure, but I'm totally positive that this was definitely true. Hoover had a friend who owned a resort. I believe it was in Southern California, and it was a place that he would frequent quite a bit, and Costello and Meyer Lansky would both go down there quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And every time they were down there pretty much and would run into each other, Hoover was with Tolson, and they were not necessarily getting hot and heavy in public, but there were signs of the ways that they were treating each other that led to the belief there was a relationship.
And there's just common sense stuff too. They almost had every single one of their meals together. They vacationed together. There wasn't a lot of time when they were apart. Hoover never married or wasn't really seen dating anybody. And I don't know if Tolson, I didn't really hear like if Tolson really had had a beard or anything, as they say. One thing as well is during a stretch of time, Hoover saw this guy named Dr. Marshall Ruffin. He was basically a psychiatrist. He even was the president, I think, of the American Association for Psychiatry at a certain point. And he had told his wife that Hoover was definitely troubled by homosexuality, that he was very conflicted. There was another study kind of based upon this as well, that Hoover needed to constantly destroy other people in order to maintain himself. And I don't know if that's like getting too deep into the psychology of it, but like by destroying these other people's lives, he's like in essence kind of not by proxy, but symbolically destroying the stuff about him. I don't know.
I'm so glad you put that in there because we're getting to the point in the episode where there's going to be a lot of destroying going on, and maybe it was apt to put in there.
And jumping back to, I know we do that sometimes. Going back to World War II, there was actually a situation that was pretty cool. So this group of German spies actually landed on Long Island. I think they I think they were dropped off by U-boat. And so they end up coming ashore. They kind of, I don't know if they get themselves established, but they all meet up. And one of them is like, you know what? I don't think this is for me. I don't think I'm going to do this. And so he actually goes to the FBI and is like, hey, here's the deal. We're over here from Germany, believe it or not. Yeah. And, and so, yeah, but we totally don't want to do what they are paying us to do. They were supposed to, we were supposed to go ahead and cause chaos and do all this kind of stuff. But yeah, we don't really want to do that. I'll give you the names of all of the guys that like showed up with me and everything. And then also to make sure, I'm, on the up and up, there's going to be another group that's going to be landing down in Florida. I'll tell you where it's going to happen. And you can just go down there and arrest those guys as well. Deal? Hoover's like, oh yeah, deal. But you're still going to prison.
I think he's still got 40 years.
Yeah. He's like, come again? He's like, oh, yeah. I mean, you're still a Nazi and everything. Sorry.
I believe his story was kind of interesting. He came over here, he got citizenship, and then he went back to Germany and went into the Nazi party. And since he had citizenship here, he was able to come back and kind of establish this Nazi beachhead in New York.
Do you think what happened? He was over here living. He went back over there. He was like, oh, shit. He's like, it's fucking horrible over here. I got to get back to the States. How am I going to do it? I could totally lead like a team and infiltrate the United States and just cause all types of havoc. They're like, fantastic. Wunderbar. And then once he got over here, he's like, okay, I'm back home. I just need to go ahead and let him know to arrest these other guys and I'll be scot-free.
This trip back to Germany just cost me 40 years in jail.
Exactly.
Yeah, the reason that we have to jump back for some of this stuff is there's just so much information on Hoover, which is pretty interesting considering how private of a guy this was. Like,
this is just what we've been able to discern and determine. There is, this is an iceberg situation, and I don't think we can really fathom.
The iceberg got destroyed, though. Everything under the surface got destroyed.
That's what I mean. Like, there is so much that we don't know about this that would... Did you know that in, I think it's 2027, the FBI tapes with Martin Luther King are coming out and going to be released? The ones that had the conversation recorded between him and Hoover?
Yeah, they'll push it back. This is going to be JFK papers all over again.
The Epstein list.
Yeah, exactly. As much as I would like to see it, I don't really need the tape besides just audio proof. I'm pretty sure this all happened. But yeah, all this Tolson stuff that we've been talking about in their relationship was only really found out and confirmed after he had died, because when he died, he left his entire estate to Tolson. And one of the big things that they kind of looked at was when they went through like his photo albums, it was just all him and Clyde together. Yeah. There really wasn't anything else. It was very indicative of a romantic relationship. And even though they were both shitbags, I'm glad that they found their shitbag in the world together.
They had their Adolf and Benito.
Yeah, their kind of relationship, except for I don't know if they stuck to each other too.
I like to imagine.
I hope they did. Well. Yeah. As we're talking about with these mobsters, this is a whole long end around all the way back to getting to the mafia. He did end up having to do something about this, and the fear of him getting exposed, I'm sure that's why he didn't pick up Lansky or Costello, but they created this thing called the Top Hoodlum Program. This Top Hoodlum Program would
Dumbest fucking name.
Yeah, bad name. They instituted it to try to take down these top bosses around the United States. Obviously, they didn't take down a whole lot of them because the five families were still going very strong. I'm sure these were probably bosses in different areas that weren't at the tippy top, even though I'm sure every arrest was like, this is the most dangerous mobster that we know of.
And while we're investigating the mafia, I mean, we can investigate mafia adjacent stuff. Like, why don't we look in? Don't the Kennedys actually have like ties to the mafia, or like suspected ties to the mafia? Well, I know they're your political opponents, you know, coming up for the incumbent presidency, all that kind of stuff. But I'm already investigating the mob through this hoodlum program, and they're tied to the mob. So, I mean, I should just look into all their shit too, right?
Yeah, it could pay off eventually, because if the government wants it, cool. If I go in there and I investigate the Kennedys, I already know that RFK is probably going to be a problem.
It's win-win.
Yeah, JFK, if both of these guys get in office and get in power, I already have something on them.
That's what I'm saying. You can either stop it before it happens, or you can control the situation, which is what he does in every scenario.
Yeah.
And he can already have something ready and waiting.
It's just the guy was so devious, but there's a little bit of brilliance in what he does. There's a lot of psychopathy in what he does, but there's a little bit of brilliance in it. This heavy investigation into these opposition parties, as Chris is talking about, because the incumbent president probably wants to know. We just covered why Hoover would want to do it. Of course. Why wouldn't the incumbent want to know that? I believe it was Eisenhower had finished his off. This was stage one, or battle one, of Nixon versus JFK. To get back to out of the government, MLK becomes the subject of just a litany of observation. And part of the reason was Kennedy ends up winning. MLK is running the civil rights movement at the time. JFK is pretty pro-civil rights. So as he sees this star of civil rights, JFK tries to kind of bring him into the fold to figure out what his next move will be, because JFK promised a lot. He promised a very big shakeup, and what better way than to get a hold of the guy that's leading the movement that you want to help. Hoover did not like this at all. He didn't like how close JFK was getting to him. He really didn't like how close Robert Kennedy was getting to him. And so Hoover would put little things in their ears about, he told RFK that that MLK didn't show up to JFK's funeral. Like, just these little bugs trying to discredit MLK. He gets pulled off of MLK. He gets pulled in so many different directions.
Yeah, because there's shit going on all over the country.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we have shit going on with the KKK in the South.
And RFK, seeing that that's a problem, understanding what's going on, I think there was a very large riot that happened down in maybe Tuscaloosa. It was somewhere in Alabama that drew a lot of attention down there, and Hoover knew about it. Hoover knew what was going on the whole entire time. He knew that those people getting off of the bus were going to get attacked and just didn't do anything about it.
There was an organized KKK, essentially, that they were going to be like, it was even passed down, I think, from the local police, something like that, because they're like, once the bus shows up, there's a 15 to 20 minute police response time. You guys can do anything you want during that time frame. And so it got pretty fucking nasty during that time, with a ton of people just getting beat. I don't know if did anyone die?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought so, but.
Yeah. RFK looks at Hoover. He's like, you missed it. You missed a big one.
Yeah.
You're the FBI. You should have known a little bit about that. What do you got on the Klan?
And the reason that RFK is telling him this is because, as the attorney general, serving under his brother, he's Hoover's boss. And
it's a bad look for the Kennedys.
Yeah.
So you got to get on it. And this is Hoover's whole thing was the KKK is dying out. It's lived its lifespan. It's on its way out the door. We don't really got to worry about it. Not knowing that they were in the full throat of it at that point in time.
If there was a rumor that they had been communist, he would have been just hard
on him in a heartbeat. So Hoover has to start Operation White Hate. I think it was White Hate or White Hot Hate, some goofy shit like that. Where they tried to divide the Klan up. We talked about this in the COINTELPRO episode. They would basically like send agents down there to like write on the church sign that so-and-so was dating so-and-so's wife on the side, trying to break this Klan up from the inside. But at the same time, like, not trying to just go in and arrest everybody that they know as a Klan member like they were doing to the communists.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the playbook has changed. When the enemy has changed, somehow the playbook changes.
They're not commies, they're just racists.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're from this country. Like, they were born here. This aggression in the South is finally sort of quelled to what Hoover believes is a good amount. It wouldn't be long before Hoover's back on the civil rights groups. He goes after the Black Panthers. The surveillance is pretty heavy in the Black Panthers, and again, we covered that in the COINTELPRO episode.
I'm sorry about ruining your Black Panther policy.
Well, perfect to put that in, because Hollywood falls under Hoover's scrutiny too, because he believes that they are that they're desensitizing the public to violence. They're disseminating these communist views in some of their shows. There's commies at the highest rankings of Hollywood. They ran this show called The FBI. This series would run on TV from 1965 to 1974. They released 274 episodes, and it was just basically FBI greenlit propaganda. The FBI had such a hold on this show that they were able to pick and choose which actors were allowed to be in the show based upon what they believed. If they were subversive figures, they would be held out.
They already just had a list. They're like, these are people we'll allow to be in the show. These are people we won't.
We're talking directors, producers, the grip.
Yeah.
Everybody had a dossier.
Best boy better not be a commie.
Yeah. They were looking at everything while they were making just their own FBI commercials, basically. The Kennedys were a massive problem for Hoover. The change that they wanted to bring with the civil rights era was something that Hoover really just didn't agree with. There were certain times when Robert Kennedy would check Hoover if he wanted to wiretap somebody. I don't really know what I believe. My thoughts on the Kennedy assassination have changed so much after the episode that we did on it.
I don't know what to believe, man.
I previously didn't really think that the FBI could have had a hand in it.
Well, but did Hoover?
Yeah, but again, we started this episode by talking about you can't separate Hoover from the FBI and the FBI from Hoover at this point in time. This whole thing kicks off with Kennedy's assassination, November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas. The FBI comes under investigation for failing to notify the SS that Lee Harvey Oswald...
Just say Secret Service, don't say SS.
Okay, yeah, probably a good call. Secret Service.
We've said SS in a different capacity too many times on this podcast.
Fair point. That Lee Harvey Oswald could be a potential threat. And how would they know this? Lee Harvey Oswald basically defected from the United States, went over to Russia.
He's a domestic security risk. He falls under that. They have a file on him.
They would have to, because if you're doing all of this work on looking for Russian spies and all that shit, you're going to miss Lee Harvey Oswald being over there for 4 years and then coming back. Lee Harvey Oswald had actually, like, weeks before, gone into the FBI to make complaints about his neighbors.
And by 1960, Hoover had opened files on, I think, 432,000 people. You're telling me someone that left and went over to Russia that you're keeping, this is the person you're keeping the closest eyes on, and then comes back. You do not know what activities those people are doing. And of course you do. We talked about it during the Kennedy assassination episode. Didn't they track him down to Mexico or something? He did a meeting in Mexico and they had agents down there?
Yeah, because they were trying to figure out if it was a Cuban connection.
Yeah.
I don't really understand how this all works. So there's too many weird things in it. Add in the whole Jack Ruby shooting him too before he can even really be questioned or anything like that. It just all becomes very suspicious. And then when you add in the fact that they had these reports from a couple weeks earlier of him coming in and threatening to do some pretty bad things in the city of Dallas, whether it's burning down buildings or bombing buildings. If you know that the president's coming to town in the next few weeks, after that, and this guy just made credible threats against the city of Dallas, the president's probably not too far outside of his abilities to do something stupid.
Just might be cautious and look into it. I don't know.
You got to do it. After this happens and Hoover finds out obviously there's a very interesting potential cover up in this. The FBI officially reports were filled with these half truths that were just flat out lies and omitted facts that were known facts at the time that the FBI had uncovered. Well, after this story comes out, Congress, I guess, just isn't really biting still. The Warren Commission is opened up at this point in time. And the Warren Commission basically was denied their own investigative power. So the only thing that they had to go on were these FBI reports that were already full of shit.
Mm-hmm.
That's
the
probably
same thing that you had already submitted. What are we supposed to make out of this?
Yeah, you're just going to interpret the same data.
The whole point of
way?
the commission was because we weren't satisfied with what you had reported.
Yeah, and so the FBI has this power to shape the narrative, and also they have a mole on the inside because Gerald Ford is sitting on this commission, and every time they're presented evidence and he talks to the people on the commission, he runs right back to Hoover and he whispers in Hoover's ear every single thing that he finds out about it.
Not now, Gerald.
The fallout from this, I guess, there's some stories about the guy that took the initial interview with Lee Harvey Oswald was submitted to torture. I don't believe that. But everybody that was involved in not passing along that information to higher up in the FBI was put out into the wind. They were sent on these terrible things. They had a Purvis experience in the FBI until they were run out. LBJ's years following JFK have completely shattered all of the things that I liked about LBJ. Not even Jumbo.
I was going to ask you. Jumbo's ruined.
Yeah, not even Jumbo is going to get me back on LBJ's train. LBJ being concerned about stepping in for Kennedy is going to have competition with Goldwater coming up as the Republican that he's going to be trying to submit his legitimacy to the presidential throne because he wasn't elected to be the president. He was elected to be the vice president.
Yep. Kennedy
was the one that had that. LBJ needed something. And so he probably just on one random day is sitting down with Hoover and he goes, it'd be pretty cool if I knew what was going on inside the Goldwater campaign. Like, not necessarily surveillance, but maybe something adjacent to surveillance that, I don't know, maybe something like the FBI could do?
Like when someone comes out for to the hot dog vendor and they're having a conversation, maybe that hot dog vendor, is one of your guys and tells me what they're talking about.
Yeah. JFK told me on numerous occasions about all the dirt that you probably have on him from his ties to being a womanizer and just not being a real great guy. Something that we forgot to mention about the Kennedy assassination was it came at a very interesting time because there were talks between JFK and RFK about potentially trying to get rid of Hoover.
Yeah, it was going to be in a situation where he got into his second term. The whole fear was this. If they would have turned against Hoover and tried to, because at this point too, who was the one that that allowed him to stay in past the retirement age?
LBJ.
It was WJK. Yeah. So, but there is talk essentially about Hoover kind of losing his grip with, reality, that kind of simple thing. And he needed to actually retire for someone else to step in and kind of take it in a new direction. If you're in your first term and still seeking re-election, Hoover can torpedo that. Now, once you're into your second term, the risk of that, because you're already in there, is lessened. And so JFK and RFK were like, if we're going to do it, once we're reelected, that's the time we're getting rid of Hoover.
Yeah, you're not going to try to turn on the guy that has the evidence that could stop you from getting a second term. It's just a very simple path that you can follow to after he's reelected. And there's questions prior to that about Kennedy wanting to get rid of him. I'm not saying that Hoover had necessarily a reason to do anything. I'm not saying that he wouldn't have had a reason to maybe not.
Him and RFK fucking hated each other so badly. There's these stories about just being kind of chippy back and forth. I want to say that so Hoover didn't like Bobby's more casual style and kind of his way of going about doing things. There was an incident where Hoover did something to Kennedy. Kennedy then took his big Newfoundland dog and had someone, his aide, walk it back and forth past Hoover's office where it would like shed and do all that kind of stuff. And then in retaliation, Hoover banned Kennedy Bobby from using the gym facilities.
He just put new locks on the gym. That's fantastic. See,
just to humanize it a little bit.
That's the little wars that I wish that
politicians,
would have been
they're
fought.
just like us.
Yeah. So getting back to maybe LBJ pitching, getting a little information on Goldwater, Hoover more than willing, because him and LBJ, him and Lyndon Baines Johnson used to be neighbors.
Just reaches behind him and he's like, oh, weird, what's this? And just pulls out a folder he's already got.
It just says Goldwater campaign on it, and he slides it across the desk. Johnson and Hoover had previous experience of being neighbors. So they had already kind of known each other. They'd grown to respect each other. LBJ's family knew who Hoover was and knew that he was still living in his mom's house. Like, just an odd thing there still, because I can't get over Hoover living with his mom for that long. But there was already a little bit of a camaraderie built up there. There was a little bit of respect. I'm sure LBJ knew just how dangerous Hoover was. And much like JFK, Johnson had a predilection for women. He had a giant penis that he liked to show off a lot. I'm sure he probably did some not great things that Hoover could have had already on him. But he decides to go ahead and increase surveillance on the Goldwater campaign and starts passing that along to LBJ. Not great. Wiretapping. Johnson greenlit a lot of things selfishly that kind of bum me out. Another bummer. This increased surveillance on King. He's just convinced that Johnson has. Well, he's not convinced. Johnson signs the civil rights legislation that JFK was going to.
Yeah.
So he already sees him leaning that way. He starts to poison the well with Johnson by telling MLK, or by telling him that MLK's inner circle is communist.
That they were actually being funded. Like part of their funding was actually coming directly from Moscow.
JFK had, wow, goddamn, there's a lot of acronyms here that are getting me. King had these two guys that he relied on pretty heavily in his inner circle, and both of them were deemed by the FBI to be Russian assets that were pushing the civil rights movement. And so Hoover would go to Johnson and tell him this, and then ask, hey, I want to sign this warrant to wiretap King. I also want to retain the ability to wiretap any of King's future residences that he takes up. Johnson wonders what this means, because it's kind of ambiguous that he would just be able to, like, what's a residence? Is a residence a hotel room that he's staying in? Is a residence the back room? Is he residing in the green room before he goes out and gives a speech?
Don't worry about it, Jumbo.
It's just, it's so tough to really pin down what he wants. But this is kind of the thing, is when you can be ambiguous, you can do what you want. And he's done a lot of different kind of nasty research and surveillance on people, but he ratchets it up for King. He just goes after him whole hog. There's an attempt to stop MLK's Nobel Prize ceremony where he actually went over to didn't go over to Luxembourg, but got in contact. Luxembourg, is that where they do it?
I'm not sure.
It's somewhere over in Europe. He got a hold of the people over there and started telling them, MLK is a bad guy. MLK is a philanderer. I have all of these tapes of them. He's working with the commies. We can't let him get this Nobel Peace Prize. You guys have to shut down this ceremony. Everybody in Europe is laughing at this because, dude, the communists are like right next door. We understand that they're kind of a problem, but they haven't taken any of us over yet. Yeah. We're probably not too scared of them.
They got to come through us to get to you, right?
Exactly. So maybe let's calm it down a little bit. They still give him the Nobel Prize for peace, or I don't remember. There was a spread of all of this salacious material on Capitol Hill where he's going around and distributing basically transcriptions of these phone calls that he's wiretapped, the bugs that are put in the room that are picking up all of MLK's extracurricular activities with other women.
Extra vaginal activities.
Yeah, just trying to chip away at the morality of a guy who's trying to basically bring the civil rights movement completely.
We're not condoning. Loretta Scott didn't deserve this shit, but you still don't, illegally like bug and wiretap and do all this kind of shit.
Yeah, man's fallible. Everybody has faults. I'm not saying that MLK was a perfect person, but MLK tried to save a lot of people.
Kind of one of the, toward the end of it, one of the things they did is the FBI, Hoover, drafted a letter. And the letter basically was a blackmail letter and had included a threat to King, basically saying like, hey, we know what you're doing. We know what you've done. You need to step away from this thing. You lead a discussion. You can go on and actually read what letters, but in essence, what it basically was is if you don't step away from this or you know what to do, there was some type of like suggestion toward killing himself. That people are going to find out, like, are going to see you for like the disgusting person you are.
Yeah, the whole thing is penned as basically a threat of, this comes from the FBI. This is noted that this was written by the FBI, but the way that it was written was from the view of a supporter who actually believed that King's personal life was holding back the civil rights movement, that everything that he was doing was completely inappropriate and it was going to screw everybody because he morally wasn't on the straight and narrow all the time. And then at the end, as Chris was talking about, it says, you know what you need to do to stop this. I would say it's a pretty clear, like, this is a commit suicide note, kill yourself note.
It can be taken in different ways. Regardless, it was a threat compiled through means of illegally like gathering information. Regardless of what it suggested, it's fucking wrong. Just however you want to slice it.
Yeah, it was the FBI. Yeah. It was the federal government.
The one that you're supposed to rely on to fucking protect you.
It wasn't just famous people that were getting slandered. Viola, I think her name is Louiso.
Oh, before her real quick, because there's something that happens a year before. Everyone knows what happens. King gets assassinated. The day of the funeral, guess who's at the racetrack? Hoover ends up taking a trip to bet on the ponies. So probably not a lot of contrition there. There's probably a little bit of celebratory betting on his part because, well, he's a piece of shit.
He's not an equestrian type guy.
In 1963, there was it was the Baptist church bombing that killed 4 girls. And the people that were identified as doing it through the investigation were, I think, some 4 KKK members. And basically, they gathered enough evidence and were sure enough that the way that they described the case is they had enough open and shut information that a white jury in Alabama would convict these guys.
That's not true, but...
Well, it didn't even get to that point because Hoover told them to essentially stop the investigation and just kind of let it go. They knew exactly who these people were, but he chose not to pursue this. Now we come to 1965 and the Viola Louiso situation.
Yeah, Viola was a white woman who had a full belief in the civil rights movement. She had gone down and I believe marched in Selma. She was very active. She was coming back down, I believe it was to Memphis, maybe somewhere in the South. And as she was driving down there, she was with a black guy that was in the passenger seat, and her car was run off the road by 4 KKK members, including a guy named Gary T. Rowe, who was actually an FBI informant, who was a full-blown, full-fledged member of the Klan that was collecting a paycheck from the FBI. These 4 guys end up running her car off the road and killing her. And she becomes the subject of like Hoover's own personal spin, as he's putting it on her, as she's a communist, that she left her family and her children to pursue sexual relationships with African-American men, and just completely trying to defame her character.
As if even like, what do you, okay, you're an abhorrent human being, but what I'm trying to understand is, what do you think that, like, in your head, you think that that's a murderable offense?
Well, and what do you win? What do you gain out of this?
Yeah.
What is there to gain by sitting there and just ripping this woman apart? So
you're justifying the KKK's action? You're like, what? You didn't stop it. You didn't, like, what what's your game here?
But this goes directly to the point that you were talking about with that psychiatrist saying that he builds himself up by tearing other people down.
Yeah.
Or he maintains by ruining other people's lives. Like this, it's just completely unnecessary to do. There's something that we didn't add in. The singer Billie Holiday, he just harassed her basically into a massive drug habit. It's hard to say that you harass somebody into addiction, but Hoover was having her shut down over just singing in clubs. And there was a point in time where she ended up overdosing and he couldn't find her. She didn't show up at the club or something like that because she overdosed. He ends up finding out that she's at the hospital and she comes to and Hoover's sitting next to her and she has handcuffs on and she's cuffed to the bed. It's just stuff like that to where they push so hard on people that they drive them insane. There's other cases that we didn't talk about and probably don't have time to talk about where they were just constantly harassing people into killing themselves to where they were attempting suicide. And this was all coming from within the FBI. Just completely terrible tactics.
Well, and sometimes they don't even want to wait. They don't even want to play that psychological game to try to take somebody out because December 4th, 1969, at 4 a.m., Chicago police raid Fred Hampton's apartment. I believe it was also located somewhere like the Black Panther Party's headquarters or something like that.
He was the deputy chairman of the Black Panther Party.
He is 21 years old, and he is basically this threat that Hoover sees because even at 21, he's a great orator. He, has the support of this party behind him, and he sees him as a threat a la Martin Luther King. And so part of this is the FBI is able to essentially kind of turn his, I want to say bodyguard, into an informant to give them information, but also a detailed layout of the apartment. They provide this information to the Chicago police to essentially perform this, and I'm doing quotes here, a fucking raid. And they come in and they essentially kill him while he's unconscious.
Yeah, they exchange gunfire with one of the other guards that's in the house. End up killing him. He is found, they said fentanyl. I'm not sure the origins of how old fentanyl is. I know it's a lot older than we think it is, but that he had a lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. So he had been drugged before they had even shown up. There's belief that the bodyguard that they flipped may have injected him.
Yeah.
He was found with 2 rounds in his head. And already basically comatose, half-dead man. Yeah. They come in and shoot twice. They shoot him in the same bed that he's sharing with his girlfriend that's 8.5 months pregnant. Just absolutely horrendous. They had interviewed one of the guards that had been shot in the shootout, and he had said that they had heard 2 officers walk into the room and fire 2 gunshots and then say he's dead. Like it wasn't like a hail of gunfire that ended up connecting twice to the dome for him. Pretty premeditated. So
it's an assassination.
Yeah. We lose the deputy chairman of the Black Panther Party, a 21-year-old that was killed by the FBI.
Well, and Chicago law enforcement on the instruction and advisement of the FBI.
Yeah.
Still, probably would not have happened without the FBI turning his bodyguard and then also kind of setting up and orchestrating it.
Yeah, there's a great chance that he's still alive. Well, depending on his age in 69, I'm not sure now, but yeah, he would have seen another day.
Well, he probably would have been taken out by Hoover a week down the road, a month down the road. Yeah.
There's always that chance. The Nixon administration is, to me, a beautiful combination of just 2 assholes that come together that have a love for wiretapping. And
they love tapping wires.
Yeah, they had already had a connection with Nixon being the VP for Dwight and going through the whole race against JFK the first time. I'm sure that Nixon knew that Hoover had information on Kennedy that Hoover had probably made him privy to during the race. They became fast friends. The wiretapping went very, very well. There were meetings between Kissinger, Nixon, the AG, John Mitchell, and Hoover where they were just agreeing to try to clog these leaks that were coming out of the administration because if you can't wiretap somebody that's an enemy, you need to figure out how to shut the people up that are talking about the illegal shit that you're doing within your own cabinet. Mm-hmm. So you're basically turning Hoover on the government himself to get recordings of these people trying to make sure that they're not trying to sneak Nixon or Kissinger's plans out.
It's not like he wasn't already at war with them. He had information on every probably sitting member of Congress and pretty much anyone and everyone that was within an administration.
Great chance of that. The relationship grew even more is Nixon. Oh, shit. We missed it. Hoover's coming up to his end of term, his forced retirement at the age of 70 under LBJ. Obviously, doing business for LBJ is going to come with LBJ going ahead and suspending the mandatory retirement age of 70 for Hoover.
Okay, so many, I get, Jesus Christ. Okay. I already think there should be an age limit on members of Congress and a lot of different public offices because there can only be a certain period of time in which you're in touch enough with society that you can make educated, informed decisions. Mm-hmm. Once you get to a certain age, you're set in your ways, regardless of how much you want to go ahead and not be set in your ways. It doesn't turn out well for anybody. You have someone that has been in the FBI, has been the FBI for the last, at that point, maybe 35 years.
Probably 40 at that point.
For LBJ. And you're like, he's 70, but oh gosh darn it, he's doing such a good job and feeding me all this dirt from all my political opponents. The government, and the nation can't lose you. We need you to stay. And he's like, well, of course I was going to fucking leave anyway, even if you told me I was leaving. Yeah. It wasn't going to happen. And so kind of coming back up to Nixon, it gets to the point where Nixon basically is like, listen, I know LBJ already kind of did this, but just to make it official, we're going to go ahead and announce an extension of your career. And this had to come out at a certain time because they found out that coming down the pipeline was this book that was going to expose Hoover's all his little naughty secrets.
Yeah, it's very interesting that Hoover knew that this book was coming out. Nixon tells him that he's going to announce this extension. And then Hoover goes, well, the book's coming out in January. So if we could get this, done in November, that would really help me out quite a bit. And Nixon was fine with it. Nixon was cool.
Nixon was not cool.
No, he was never cool. And their relationship would eventually sour because Nixon, being the very scared individual that he was, knew that Hoover had all of these recordings that he had asked him to make. So Nixon asked Hoover if he would go ahead and hand over those recordings so Nixon could dispose of them. And Hoover knew what he had. Hoover knew that he had gold.
Nah, dog.
No, yeah, this isn't going to happen. Sorry, bro.
These are staying right here.
This is staying in Daddy's pocket. And Nixon clearly didn't like that. There was a couple other issues that Nixon and he would have just kind of running afoul of each other. It's tough because there's really, at this point in time, Nixon's done some bad shit. Hoover's done some bad shit. They're at an impasse because now they're on the outs with each other. Only bad things can happen from here, and only bad things do happen from here. Because in 1971,
good things, bad things for
good
Hoover.
Things for us, bad things for them. There was a burglary that happened in Media, Pennsylvania, at an FBI office. There were 8 activists that stole these private internal documents on COINTELPRO. I don't know why in the world Media, Pennsylvania was the place where these documents were stored, probably because nobody on the West Coast or really anybody outside of Pennsylvania could tell you where Media was.
No, look at it from this perspective. So Media, Pennsylvania, I'm not sure its location, but it was probably a field office that took care of a broader area. There was probably surveillance going because it might have been closer to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, something like that. This is an age when there's not computers. So in order for offices to have access to the information, they have to have hard copies of all of the information about all of the different things going on. Maybe it's just for their area, though. But it's still that COINTELPRO that they're handling for that entire area. So they have to have that stuff on file.
It must have been some good shit because the Citizens for Commission to Investigate the FBI probably could have shortened that up a little bit. Starts to distribute this stolen information to newspaper and politicians. And there was a point in time when Gerald Ford got a packet of it and he didn't even open it up. he walked it straight over to Hoover and he handed it to him. He goes, I believe this is yours.
Mm-hmm.
And walked away.
How this went down is this group, and it was made up, I think there were a couple like college professors in it and everything, but they had surveilled this area and they had kind of picked out this office because it was a more isolated, like a smaller office. They had cased this place. They found out like how all the security worked. They watched people come in and out, and they planned to break in and steal these documents on the night of the George Foreman Muhammad Ali fight.
Foreman Ali,
because they knew that people would be so glued to TVs and so just distracted and preoccupied that they would have their best chance of getting there and getting out. So as they're in there and they're going through the information, just grabbing anything and everything in these suitcases, they can hear the fight going on like in the apartment, like above the office and everything. And so they end up getting out and kind of deciding, going through, it takes them weeks to go through and kind of figure out what they have.
They got a lot of shit.
Yeah, they got a ton of stuff. So,
their escape, they loaded documents up in all the different cars, and then everybody headed in different directions with the documents. So just in case one of them was taken down, there would be 7 others out there
and
with
then eventually
information.
go and meet up to go through everything. Like Adam said, they start to kind of disseminate this information through these different kind of journalists that are willing to actually take a risk to do this, because again, the FBI and Hoover still have this giant spin machine that just counters anything and everything that comes out.
Yeah, there are arguments in the media within like newspapers of journalists saying we need to get this stuff out, and the heads of the newspapers are saying this is stolen information. We can't be disseminating something that was stolen information. How does that make us look? We need to return this.
But it's exposing illegal activities.
Yeah.
So essentially the information is in itself stolen. We're simply exposing that fact.
They see the value for not only the readers, but also themselves to be sending this stuff out. Church committee is eventually launched after there's enough hubbub on Capitol Hill about things. Is Hoover's birthplace.
1975, right?
I think so.
So the church committee...
Was it 75? It took 4 years?
I believe so.
Okay.
Because it was 71 that was exposed, but in order to gather the information and actually have the committee with all of their information and evidence, I think it took them a little while. What's the unfortunate part of this?
Well, Hoover didn't make it to see this church committee investigation.
Why don't any of the fuckfaces ever live to stand trial?
I don't know, man. That's a bummer. That's what made me sad when you said 75, because the church committee, through this investigation into the program of COINTELPRO, comes out with the conclusion that there was major fault in the conduct of the FBI as far as just how COINTELPRO was run. And there was this full-on list of documentation of this history of political repression and civil rights violations that were committed by the FBI, which we just talked about for an entire episode. I mean, we laid out all of the stuff and even didn't have time to bring in more stuff to look at because it was just so vast.
And that's just the stuff that was allowed to be at a field office of the FBI. That's a fraction of the iceberg. That's not even the whole top of the iceberg. There's still all of this other stuff. And unfortunately, kind of having to backtrack a little bit from the church committee, we come to May 2nd, 1972. FBI Director J. Edgar is supposed to wake up to have his morning breakfast of 2, I think they were over medium eggs, toast, and then like black coffee or something.
Yeah, he had to have had a bran muffin in there somewhere, right?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so.
I think he was just naturally tight.
No, we've discussed why.
Tolson thought of that.
Yeah. So his driver comes in. He's like, hey, Mr. Hoover's running late. It's not like him. He's usually insanely punctual and on time. And his housekeeper's in there making his breakfast. She's like, yeah, he hasn't come down yet. But, he's like, 77 years old at this point. And so, he's old. He's been a little stressed out due to, all of that stuff about the documents being leaked. And so, 77. And they're like, okay, they wait 15 minutes and they're like, okay, he's still not coming down. We got to go check on him. He has the key. So they go upstairs, knock on the door. Mr. Hoover. No answer. Opens the door, cracks it. Hey, Mr. Hoover, are you all right? No sound. Goes in, looks. No one's on the bed. He's like, okay, well, he might be in the bathroom. Goes in the bathroom, doesn't find anyone. And then finally takes a look around the other side of the bed and sees dead Hoover.
I bet Ted Hoover probably still had a scowl on his face. It's a pretty dangerous call going into the FBI director's bedroom with
he was dead.
behind a locked door.
Yeah, he was dead.
Hoover had a lot of health concerns he was 77 and he was still the FBI director and had done stuff that if souls were real, he would have already given most of his soul away.
They said that kind of during the later years,
his soul
so pretty much the last 20 of his life, he was actually being given vitamin shots.
Wasn't there some other historical madman that was taking vitamin shots?
Yeah. God, what was it? Schmadoff Mittler. No, hold on.
Big mustache?
Midler? No, not Bette Midler.
Small mustache.
Adolf Hitler.
That's right.
It was that guy. Yeah, he was given a cocktail of vitamin shots. And they said that when Hoover did get his vitamin shots by his nurse or his nurse or doctor that was with him for the long period of time, he would always be kind of like manic right at the beginning of it and everything. And then he would kind of taper off and be very productive for the first half of the day. And then he would just get so sleepy and tired.
He just locked the door to his office and take a nap until it was time for him to be driven home.
Mm-hmm.
Just an interesting life for this FBI director that's out there having the FBI actively ruin people's lives. He's napping.
Yeah, was Hitler on something? Or not Hitler. We know Hitler was on something, but was Hoover on something? Maybe a little bit of that amphetamine shit?
Yeah, it couldn't have been good, though, if it only lasted him through lunch. Unless he had a big lunch, then I could see him getting a little tuckered out in the afternoon.
Like a pot pie? Like a whole pot pie to himself?
A lot of carbs. Operational command was passed off to his associate director,
/ lover,
Clyde Tolson. Pretty big deal because it was for the rest of the day. May 3rd, Nixon goes ahead and installs Patrick Gray, is named the acting director. Patrick Gray had absolutely no previous business in the FBI.
Good.
Which, yeah, I mean, I guess that's good. At the same time, Patrick Gray, I think, was also indicted in the Watergate break-in.
Bad.
So, yeah, maybe a convenient idiot.
I want to imagine that when Clyde was told he's going to be acting director, and for that day, he walked into Hoover's office, slowly closes the door behind him, approaches the desk, running his hands along the warm wood, looks at a picture of him and Edgar sunning on a beach somewhere, and gently bends down and sniffs the chair. Oh, Eddie, I'm going to miss you.
At the same time, Tolson's got to be a wreck because his lifelong friend, partner, and probably lover just died.
Yeah.
So he just gets control for the rest of the day.
Can't even be upset.
No.
He can't take bereavement. What's the reason? He was my boss.
My very close boss. Upon his death, there was a very strict set of rules that that Hoover's secretary would have to follow.
Do you think Hoover made Tolson call him director? Like, you like that director?
And
you like that director?
Uh-huh. I got the files for you, director.
Mm-hmm.
I got this dossier.
Oh, I'm going to fill your index.
One time Tolson
What list are you on?
Tolson goes, call me a communist. He goes, 2-4.
Call me a radical? All right, you dirty radical.
Hoover had like this lifelong secretary. Her whole entire career was just being under J. Edgar Hoover.
Never married.
Married
to the job.
Yep. Married to the game. Married to making sure that Hoover's end-of-life plans were followed to a T. Hoover basically had 2 stacks of paperwork that he would file everything that came to him in. It was his private work, and it was the confidential work or something like that.
Yeah, so he kept all the juiciest shit for himself, and it was actually stored like with his secretary. Imagine that scene that you see sometimes in spy movies when like the safe house, they're like, oh my God, we're getting out of here, and they all just start shredding documents and burning shit. That's exactly what she has been advised to do, and she is more than happy to do this stuff because she's Hoover's girl. Over and over, they wore dresses together, possibly. You didn't get to talk about that.
Hell yeah, we are.
Okay. But no, so she gets this notification. It's basically like I like to imagine, in like in Crimson Tide, where they have to break the plastic to get the launch code, and then pull out the paper.
Oh, yeah.
I imagine it's something like that where she's like, Hoover's dead, and she has to break the thing, and it's like, burn it all. And so she basically takes all of the file cabinets. There was an insane amount of file cabinets.
Took a moving truck,
moved them all to Hoover's house, and then spent the next several days in the basement, essentially destroying all of these documents. And when they asked her, hey, what's in the giant moving truck full of file cabinets? She's like, it's actually just Mr. Hoover's like personal stuff, like his tax returns and some of his like stock portfolio stuff. They're like, you need a whole truck for that? She's like, oh yeah, he was very involved.
He was 77. He had a lot of tax returns.
Mm-hmm.
I mean...
So all of that stuff, all of the dirtiest shit was all destroyed by this little fucking old lady.
You can't let that happen. I understand that you were very close to this guy, but just as a matter of national security, and if you really were...
Loyalty, dog.
Believe in everything Hoover said, you got to turn this stuff over. There'd be so much more information that we would have if we had a hold of these things. Probably worse stuff than we've talked about. We've talked about some pretty bad stuff. Most of his estate, as I'd said earlier, was left to Tolson. So a bittersweet parting gift for his sweet, sweet angel Tolson. Hoover's body was the only, he was the only civil servant that wasn't a politician,
soldier,
or
president, or previous president.
Yeah, that had laid in state inside the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. He was given the special treatment. Nixon, as a parting gift, besides, what was Nixon's reaction when he heard that Hoover died?
Oh, Jesus Christ. Hold on, I'll do it in the Nixon voice. Jesus Christ, that old cocksucker.
So...
that had to be either the scariest day or the happiest day for so many people.
Yeah.
Because Ding Dong the witch is dead, can no longer gather information. But what did this madman, who now has literally nothing to lose, is this all set to come out? Like, is all this stuff just going to get released? But thankfully, he was enough of like a narcissist and just had a large enough ego that he wasn't going to do that, because that would solidify essentially the ruining of this legacy that he had built.
Yeah, he was tied into all the information, all the dirt that he dug up on other people.
You could do what he did with the whole COINTELPRO hearings and everything and be like, well, that was actually under the purview of this person, and I didn't know what to extent that they were doing and everything. I only authorized this. He was always insulated by 2 or 3 degrees. That can essentially, when it's like one operation like that, you can distance yourself from it if you're a horrible human being. When it's all of this stuff tied to you and you don't have an opportunity to then get that PR team spinning it up because you're dead, all of that it's unquestionable at that point.
Tarnishes your legacy pretty bad. But yeah, there was a point in time where Nixon was quoted as saying, "We can't fire this guy. He has the ability to burn down the castle."
This is the kind of man that would tear down the temple with him.
That's what it was, yeah. Nixon, after his celebratory, this fucker's dead, goes ahead, and the new construction for the FBI office is named the J. Edgar Hoover FBI office to this day.
They're getting a new office. The name won't transfer, I don't believe.
Are they getting a new office?
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Now we get into maybe the fun parts of this. Hoover may have been a crossdresser. He may have crossdressed a lot in the 50s. There's a few different stories about this happening. Kind of this whole thing comes from this guy who was a close friend of Hoover. He was a contributor to his campaign. His name was Louis Rosenstiel. His 4th wife. So again, we're getting information from the 4th wife of Hoover's friend, who I'm assuming, if you know that this guy just struck out 3 times in marriages, you're probably not the most centered person to want to go into that. Like, I'll change him, I'll fix this. She tells a story of Hoover being at this all-male party with a bunch of very young male prostitutes in a dress. He is also partying with a man that was Julius and Ethel Rosenberg's prosecutor, the 2 spies that were prosecuted. He was Senator McCarthy's chief counsel when he was being grilled on Capitol Hill and through all of his legal struggles. He's also the former representation of the current president of the United States. Yeah, they were all, she said that this was just an all-male party, that him and Tolleson were walking around in dresses and they were parading around. There's other kind of stories that go into experiences of people who were children at the time that were brought into the FBI office. They met a woman that was in Hoover's office. Upon leaving, they realized that they were in J. Edgar Hoover's office and Hoover wasn't around.
But standing before them was the ugliest woman they'd ever seen.
Yes, a very common belief that he had done it. I think Chris is kind of right on when we were talking about it before the episode, and he said that there's no way that Hoover would be that close to being forward-facing with something as radical as that during the time.
Yeah, I'm not discounting it from happening as far as like him having done that, not in the office where like someone would have actually seen him, but like at these parties where he felt like he was protected because he could sell everybody else out the party because they were trying to hide too. Nothing against anybody who lives with their mother till they're 40. If you listen to this podcast, we appreciate you. And I know this is coming toward the tail end of the podcast, but again, no offense if that's your thing. Or if you're taking care of your mother and everything like that.
Noble cause.
Yes. But I do feel like there is some type of psychological or mental tax when that kind of thing happens, especially if you are, I don't know, someone that shall remain nameless, but that doesn't have any type of like female relationship. The only meaningful relationship he has to have, or he has to hide because he's actually going after those people. So he's the largest hypocrite in the world. But you're going to have some, I get, not Edward Bates. God, what's the guy from fucking Psycho?
Norman Bates.
Norman Bates. I do get some Norman Bates vibes where maybe he would, I miss mother. I'm going to go into her closet. I'm going to go ahead and throw on a dress, throw on a little rouge, tuck my sack back.
Saturday, you haven't done laundry all week. You have nothing to wear, but mom's clothes are still in her closet. A dress might feel nice in this nice fall or in this nice spring breeze.
All I see is that song from Silence of the Lambs where it's like,
yeah, this guy is somebody who, usually when we do episodes on people, you kind of try to get a gauge on what their motivation is to try to do what they do. You try to kind of dive into their mind a little bit. This guy has had me wrapped up in myself just trying to figure out what his motivation was to do the things that he did, because there's so many things like him torturing Purvis for being the front-facing, of the Dillinger stuff.
It's me or no one.
But then it's not him taking these steps forward into the public eye and being the rock star that he could have been.
He just wants word of mouth. He wants to be that person that if you hear his name, the only thing that comes into your head is like the positive aspects of it and what he's done.
And he was. His general acceptance in the public was pretty high for a lot of his career.
The thing is, too, is like if you're thinking about like being in public, he was not a handsome man.
No.
And I think the other thing, too, is being someone who is on the shorter side of the spectrum, actually 5'9" is average, I think. That could have been I definitely believe that was a source of insecurity for him, but he had made himself through all of these news stories and the TV show and all this kind of stuff, this larger than life figure. Seeing him had to instantly be a disappointment.
Yeah?
Like, look at little Eddie.
Yeah, you never want to meet your heroes, and he kept himself out of the spotlight enough to where he probably didn't have a whole lot of...
Any pictures of him, he's standing up on like a box or he has lifts in.
He had lifts.
He had to make all the agents actually like kind of like crouch down. He's like, crouch your ass down.
Mm-hmm. He probably made them take their shoes off just to go bare feet with him and his lifts in. So a very interesting man, very bad man. It kind of throws me off to know that we've had runs of people like this that have kind of shaped our government. The FBI is still a questionable organization. People still question them to this day. The other FBI directors that came after him, Sessions, Comey, Ray, all of these dudes have been questioned for actions that the public doesn't agree with. And it spans both sides of the spectrum. Both sides of the aisle have attacked the FBI director at times. And to know that those guys had pittance of dumb shit done compared to a 48-year career of Hoover's most subversive, disgusting tactics. It's like, maybe those guys aren't that bad. Maybe we need to reassess the FBI a little bit.
We need to gauge our line, grade it on a curve a little bit.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, man. I can't think of a better way to end it than that.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us again. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and we'll catch you next week.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.